Welcome to Talking in Stations. This is Manderall. Sorry, that's my weekday. Let me try that again. Welcome to Talking in Stations, a podcast about EVE Online. I am Manderall. So today we're going to talk about theory crafting with some FCs and high-minded people. So we'll do some introductions in just a second, but we also want to let you know that Snuff has killed the Keepstar in Igniton. That just went down a few minutes ago. We'll check in with that. And then later we'll talk about fleet formations, Marauders, Interdictors, hacks, and of course the mobile Sino fields and how those things might change things. And then we'll check in with player news that's going on up north and also in Delve. With me today to do all that is Elise Randolph.
Hey, how's it going, everyone?
Caleb Aranya.
Hey, guys.
Fonsui.
Good day.
Hateless.
Hello, guys.
Sutonia.
Hey, everyone.
And our guest today, Amelia, Duskspace.
Hey, guys. Thanks for having me.
Sure, Amelia. Welcome. Before we get started, these guys are regular fixtures, but Amelia, you're new. Can you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Sure. I fly with Gore and Clade. We're a wormhole group that doesn't consider themselves a wormhole group because we mainly only operate in nullsec space. So we just kind of roll our static and find some small gang content.
Awesome. All right. A little bit about the Snuff kill that just happened. This is Keepstar and Igniton. It was a free port. It was part of the Tranquility Trade Consortium. I think that's like a sister Keepstar to the Tranquility Trade Tower that is in Perimeter. And so we believe that that whole complex inside of Igniton that works there together, which would be like a giant mining platform, a giant engineering platform, and the Keepstar, all that stuff will probably end up going down in an undefended way. The Snuffed Out being the big group in low-sec right now that is destroying other people's big structures. That just can't be stopped since most of the owning parties are at war. For instance, Goonswarm probably couldn't help the Space Pope defend the Keepstar in Vazgaren, and Pappy and specifically Villy and Test couldn't or didn't want to move the resources up north to fight in Igniton. So that's the situation. Basically, Snuff can roam around and kill some things. Is there anything about that, Sutonia, that you wanted to comment on?
Oh, I think other people were having a better discussion than I was having about it with regards to like the conversation and things. But it's interesting, right? There's no one really able to contest Snuff out right now because all of the like available supers and titans are kind of either involved in Delve or they're involved in like tribute. There isn't really like a bunch of supers, and like dread caches have been moved away from this area mostly to Delve.
Yeah,
I think that's actually a really important thing. Like, so many dreads have been dying over the course of this war. I'm sure instead of building a new, because they're quite expensive to build brand new, people that had dread caches throughout low sec or anywhere, they're just like, oh well, we're not using these. We can just move these up. And so, like Sutonia said, Snuff can just move around with impunity now. They can do all the fun things they want to do. Like, oh, what's going to annoy the most people? I'm going to do that, and there's going to be no repercussions.
It's vacation burglary. They're basically going through the entire neighborhood.
Is there anybody that compete with them? I'm thinking Ivana or...
Well, there's two groups mostly in low-sec that are about the same size as Snuff that could compete with them. The first is Siege Green, which is a Korean group, but this is a really bad time zone for them, obviously, since they live in Korea. So they can't really contest Snuff outside of their own Asian time zone. And then you also have Wrecking Crew, but they're currently down south near Providence. So I think they're about 7 or 8 mids away from here, or at least 6. So... it's pretty hard for them to be able to come over.
Do those groups have a particular interest in challenging Snuff for any?
I can't hear you, Fonsui.
Do those groups have a particular interest in challenging Snuff for any reason?
I mean, I'm sure Wrecking Crew would love to take a few Titans off of Snuff's hands. I think Siege Green probably would like to do that too. It's just either not in the area or it's out of their time zone.
Yeah. All right. So that's the situation in Igniton. Elise, can you tell us what's happened in CCP news this week? It's big stuff, I think.
Yeah. So there's a Marauder, Bastions of the Deep. Is that what it is? Bastions of War. So
I like Bastions of the Deep, though.
Yeah, I do too. Actually, I'm gonna write some letters to my representatives. Maybe they can swap it over. But no. So CCP announced that part of this quadrant. Obviously, we have the fleet formations coming up, but there are also some other balance changes, specifically from Team Talos. There's a balance pass to Marauders, balance pass to Hacks, balance pass to the webbing bubbles, or as I hope that they're officially called now, Wubbles. And a few other things. CCP Signal and CCP Rise from Team Talos actually went on the podcast hosted by Pando and Mirandalorian.
Pando FC chats.
Yeah, the Pando FC chats. And it was a fantastic show. You should definitely watch it. I think the VOD is saved on Pando's Twitch. But they kind of went over like, hey, this is what we were thinking behind it all. This is why we did this. They gave us some insight onto how the fleet formations are going to work. They talked about the mass test that's coming on Tuesday to have everyone try it out. So make sure, guys, if you're around on Tuesday to partake in that mass test. It's going to give them a lot of answers. And during that show, actually, a few people were talking about like different changes, and you could see CCP afterwards. After that show, they're like, on the weekend, on their own time, they were kind of like working away at it. And they're like, they made even tweaks to their own tweaks that they pushed to the test server, which obviously aren't confirmed going to be in there forever, but that's what they're looking at right now. So it's kind of neat to see them iterating at a fast pace. CCP Rise even actually went on to say that, hey, if you guys thought the first couple months were slow, it's because we were on extended vacation here at CCP. So everyone's been back for I think about a month and a little bit now, and they're working full speed. So you'll start seeing a little bit more of the cadence of patches and stuff coming out that you were accustomed to last year.
All right, cool. So what's the big stuff? What's the big thing this week?
Marauders go per.
Marauders, fleet formations. But what do you think is at least what do you think that the top thing is in this I don't know, this week, I guess?
I don't know. Kind of everything seems to be there. Every little bit seems to be like it could be very important depending on where you play, I guess.
At least loves all of his changes equally.
So the hack change is going to affect nullsec quite substantially, right? So the hack change that is on CC right now, there's a slight nerf. Yeah, there's a slight nerf to the ADC, which isn't that big of a deal. But all hacks, except for the tournament edition ones, yes.
Which
now no longer get the
bonuses, by the way, Elise, just so you know.
Really? Damn it.
Yes.
Damn it. I
Wait,
had
what did you
value
say?
and then lost it.
In the patch notes, CCP Riot said they're not removing the signature bloom bonuses from any of the tournament hacks, but tournament hacks have them. So either CCP Rise is trolling Casper like deliberately, or they just don't know about the AT ships at all.
Oops.
Oh well, the Adresti is still got a nice spot in my heart. The memer's garbage though. But yeah, so the MWD Sig Bloom is going away, or at least it is right now on Singularity. Obviously, that's not on Tranquility right now, but it does show what CCP is kind of thinking about it. CCP Signal and CCP Rise on Pando stream did talk about hack proliferation and how they kind of want to change it. Rise went on to say Team Talos has basically nerfed hacks every single patch that they've been able to. And they're still like incredibly dominant. So they're looking at more things that they can do. And this is one of the tools in their bag that they can do to
this is different than changing their base stat, like their navigation and their damage. This is like changing, some of the core mechanics of how these things have been used.
Yeah, so it'll be interesting to see how essentially how the nullsec blocks are going to take to this change, right? Because a lot of the fights were hack on hack. So having a bigger signature is probably not going to be that effective. But maybe coupled with some other changes that we're going to see coming in, maybe battleships will be a little bit more prevalent again, or at least have a role. I know the Imperium really like to use the Megathron hull, and that is a great hull because it's got like this insane tracking bonus. So you're talking about an insane tracking bonus plus a bigger signature of your target. Maybe these things can start dying a lot faster. And let's see, what are another big change that they're doing is they're changing the wobbles, the webification bubbles. They've increased the size of it. They've decreased the cooldown of it, and they've decreased the delay time of it, and they've also increased the amount that it webs you, right?
More range, more effect.
And they've also they've significantly buffed the platform that uses these things as well. Suetonia can speak to this much better than I can, but the interdictors are getting much, much beefier. I think the flycatcher is completely busted.
So this is actually an important point. Like to say that there's one change that is the most important is kind of unfair, because what we have is changes to the stasis webification probe, changes to the interdictors, changes to hacks, and the fleet formations, and all of these things do not exist in a vacuum. You know, these things are going to have interplay. There's going to be synergistic changes, and to say that one thing is the most is kind of like oversimplifying it.
Yeah, it is. Okay. So if people aren't really so the stasis webification bubble has been around for a few months. When it first came out, I was like, holy shit, this thing's so broken. It's going to be everywhere. And then nobody really used it for a while. It took the theory crafters to come up with a really good reason to use it. But essentially the way it works now is if you're beating someone, one of the reasons many people fly hacks is because it's very hard to pin them down. They've got a very good ability to escape. So you can take on a fight that you might not win, but you can always MWD out. Right, you go 2K a second. You'll lose a few guys to stragglers and tackle, but the rest of your fleet will get out. What people have been using the wobbles for, in Delve at least, is, if they are going to win, this lets them win harder and kill more stuff on the way out, because it can slow the entire fleet down, keeps them in interdiction bubbles for a little bit longer, right? It lets everyone catch up to them, do more damage. So if your cost of extracting was 20 Munins or 20 Eagles before, with the wobbles, it's now maybe 40 or 50, right? So that can be really devastating to people as they're trying to extract. So you can argue that it's bad for engagement, because now people don't want to take a more lopsided fight and they'll wait a little bit, but it has caused a lot of destruction. So seeing these buffed, it definitely does seem like it affects hacks a lot more, because these are the very nimble platforms, or at least that's what the intention is, right?
Yeah, and it also buffs sabers or not just sabers, interdictors. I just say sabers because I'm too used to
that was the problem.
I mean, for a whole generation, people said Frigidaire and Kleenex, so it's fine.
Yeah, well, I was going to say, it significantly buffs dictors at waterboarding people now with the range increase from 10 kilometers to 15 kilometers. Previously, if you have like two dictors on a gate, one can load wobbles, one can load bubbles. The first one bubbles, and then the second one can drop a wobble. But with the old 10-kilometer range, most people, when they despawn from a gate, they're about 12 kilometers from the gate, it wouldn't hit them. Whereas now with just a regular Stargate, like it could make, you're going to hit like a considerable amount of them, even all of them, if it's like a small gate like the Mars Stargate. So it could make like waterboarding like much, much more painful with interdictors, which is either really exciting or incredibly depressing, depending on which end of it you end up being on.
Yeah, and McLeod does bring up a really good point. So one of the things, if you're flying an MWD hack, okay, your speed goes from 2.4K a second to like 1.5, 1.6. Okay, you're still moving pretty fast. You can get out of there. But if you're in something like an A hack or a T3 afterburner cruiser, you're essentially done if you let one of these bubbles touch you, because you've got, instead of going 600 or 700 meters a second, suddenly you're going 450, 500, and you need that speed. Your defense is predicated on how fast you can move with a low signature. So you can be like completely decimated if you get one of these on you. And the platforms also got buffed quite substantially. So these ships are a little bit more tanky, a little bit more easy to keep alive.
Sounds like maybe they're trying to make the meta a little bit more static than flowing and moving fast.
I think the idea behind it is there's going to keep people on grid longer and more stuff is going to die. But that's one of those weird things where, like, if you try to achieve that, the players are going to take that and twist it around and break it on you. And so one of the things that CCV Signal and CCV Rise mentioned is that, hey, we're constantly looking at how you guys are going to break this, because we know you're going to. It's not a matter of if you're going to break it, it's how you're going to break it. And so, we're going to make iterations, quick passes on it if we see this stuff happening, and we're going to keep an eye on it. So that's kind of a good thing to hear. One of the more interesting things, and I guess kind of proof positive about this, is when we're talking about the Marauder changes, which Hayless can go into with much more detail of what it means. But the first, like the dev blog itself mentioned that the Marauder was getting these certain buffs, and part of the other thing was like, oh, because we're giving you these buffs to compensate, we're going to make the Bastion last a little bit longer. And then as this was presented, there was a lot of threads on Reddit, a lot of threads on the EVE forums, a lot of people talking about it. And they made really good cases, frankly, for that being a bad thing. CCP listened within a day, like within a day of listening to those things, they changed it from originally it's 60 seconds on Bastion. They were going to put it to 90 seconds. And then they were like, oh, we'll just put it to 30 seconds because of what you guys talked about.
That's insane.
It's nice to see that they're willing to make these changes very quickly, adapting to not only community feedback, but how the EVE players are breaking things.
I think that's the biggest thing about this, is like, I think regardless of how people feel about the changes, is as long as there's a change to be had, I think people are generally happy, because I think everyone can agree that, the game's gotten a bit stale.
So just to be clear, so what you're saying they did with Mirage, so the current state is that they now buffed two things instead of putting in a buff and a nerf.
Yeah.
Yep.
That's I'm really gonna like Marauders.
They're definitely going to have to nerf them, because I already know a lot of like small gang people are theory crafting really disgusting shit that they're going to get hard nerfed pretty soon. Imagine.
So my quick analysis of the original Marauder changes. So they said we're going to give them a lot more power, double the output, but to compensate for that, we're going to keep them on grid we're going to increase the commitment time by 50% from 60 to 90 seconds. And I don't. There might be specific timers or whatnot that I'm not aware of, but it doesn't feel like going from 60 to 90 is really all that impactful. But going this other way around and shortening it, this is like now they're like nimble. Now they can like leave. I mean, 30 seconds of commitment is kind of like warp alignment time anyway for some larger ships.
Yeah, especially there's tricks that you can do in Marauders. Like if you hit your prop when you only have like 8 to 9 seconds left on your Bastion module, when the Bastion ends, as long as you're like spamming warp to something, your MWD cuts out like 1 second after you start aligning, and you insta warp out. So you're basically
out.
Oh, they patched that out
a while back. Yeah.
Really, I think it still works, because you can still cycle your MWD in Bastion, right?
With a 30-second timer, they could patch all sorts of things, but there are going to be some things that you're going to be able to accomplish with only a 30-second minimum commitment that it's going to be very dangerous right now to face down a Marauder.
Well, Marauders have a lot of weaknesses.
They don't anymore because they removed the ECM weakness from them. They removed tons of other weaknesses from them.
So they can still get like they can get shut down pretty hard, and I get that that's counterable with cat boosters, but at the same time you can only do so much. What was I going to say? Sorry, I just lost my train of cat because
ask the cat what you were going to say. Listen, this is one thing that I wanted to put in here, and that isn't the Marauder supposed to be a PvE ship, and why are they tuning it for PvP?
So, firstly, that Marauder has needed help for a long time. It's been too expensive for what you can get out of it, and it's been needing change. So I don't know if this is going to be the final form, but I'm glad they've gotten around to Marauder. But in terms of what it's supposed to be, it's possible that whoever designed it back in the day had a thought in mind. but what it was and what it can be now don't have to be the same thing. It can be repurposed. Maybe it wasn't really getting used terribly much, so a new role for it would kind of make sense. So I don't think it's terribly important to focus on its original design intent. Rather, we should focus on what we can get out of it.
Well, the reason I bring this up is because there was big complaints. I was just reading about it. I was going through some historic posts, and there was huge complaints about PvPers saying, "Hey, why are you nerfing our fighters for PvP just to balance PvE?" And it seems like this is the opposite of that.
So can I explain where Marauders sit right now in PvE?
Sure, go ahead.
Okay, so Marauders in PvE right now require you to siege to get the tank bonus, and they don't get any extra real DPS out of sieging. They get 10% range bonus, which is sometimes useful, sometimes not. And so they're pretty much a battleship that has twice as much tank as it needs for any reason whatsoever in any PvE environment. And there's no other benefit except for the tank. So in almost every case, a pirate ship is cheaper and more efficient and faster than a Marauder at this time. And then Marauders are double the cost. So it puts them in a really weird spot where there's a couple like really super niche uses for them, but there's nothing really like, there's not a real reason to own a Marauder right now.
Well, so Marauders are effectively one of the most powerful PvE ships that you can use, certainly in Empire space. And they're expensive, and they're big, fat, blingy kill mails for anybody, so they're unwieldy for that reason. They're unwieldy because of Bastion. But, yeah, I mean, you mentioned a 10% bonus, but that's per level. And so their range bonus is 50% for using Bastion. And the tank bonus is...
No, it's 10%.
I thought it was 25%, isn't it? It's 25%
off. 10 when you siege.
10% fall off per level.
No, it's not per level. It's literally 10%
Bastion module. It's the
Bastion module.
Module does. It's not about the
Sorry,
the Paladin has a 10% fall off per level on its ship, but that's not the Paladin specific.
Oh, it is 25%.
It is 25%.
The tank I wouldn't want to ignore the tank bonus and say it's more than anyone needs, because as you said, like the niche uses that you mentioned aren't actually terribly niche. Like you can find a lot of uses for these in PvE. The problem has been
there's no site that requires you to have the tank of a Bastion module.
No, not unless you want to do it a certain way. It only becomes, there's nothing that required a Marauder. There's no specific piece of content that required it, but there were methodologies of achieving that content that required it.
The fact that you have double tank means that you can polarize it and put all the guns on it and laugh in DPS.
Yeah, like I've been able to accomplish. Like I created a golem build back when the emerging conduits were brand new and broken and just like ridiculous amounts of money. I designed a golem that was able to get from site to site, clear them, and like actually lock and fire and hit and faster than any other ship in the game, like guaranteed.
Yeah.
And that was because the only reason I was able to do that was because I packed it with mobility and damage and effectively ignored tank, because I knew that with the Bastion, even like a single module tank, just a shield booster, and that's it, was more than enough.
Amelia, since you have some wormhole background, is there something about the golem that is going to be, I don't know, especially good use case in wormholes?
Maybe if you're like, you mean now compared to after the changes?
Yeah. Or no, after the changes compared to now.
So I think if you're going to be like soloing high-class sites, it's definitely probably one of the best options. But I think that the amount of people that are actually soloing in those type of sites are very low when you can have significantly less risk by just doing, 2 Leshaks and a Nestor or something like that. So I don't think it's really going to have that much of a change. I'd say most of the change that we're going to see is people, running, DEDs with them or trying to fit some sniper Marauders up or something like that, because the amount of damage they're putting out now is actually insane on CC.
So the fact that they're doubling their output and they're pinned down for half the time makes them like a real PvP threat.
It also
hateless, at least then hateless.
I was going to say, so one of the rationales behind lowering the Bastion timer, right, from from 90 seconds all the way down to 30 seconds, where it currently sits at 60, is that CCP Rise had mentioned that the Bastion or the Marauders are actually one of the top ships used in PvE right now. They pulled the stats of ships that kill PvE ships, and Marauders are kind of at the top. But I guess one of the design goals, if I understand what they were saying correctly, so don't put this isn't coming from them, this is me inferring what they said, is that they want these ships to essentially replace carriers and supers that were doing a lot of ratting before. So they want you to throw this into a haven instead of your stabbed Myrmidon. Maybe you'll take this to do things quite a bit faster. And there was some blowback from the people that were using the Marauders for this, saying, hey, 90 seconds means if anyone jumps into local, like 2 jumps away, I am going to die. I'm never going to use this thing. This is dumb. And so they said, okay, that's well reasoned. That's a good idea. So we're going to make it 30 seconds. So now for PvE, you can still get caught, right? If you siege at the wrong time, or if you I'm sorry, I say siege, but it's technically Bastion. If you go into Bastion at the wrong time, you can still be caught and killed. But the amount of time that you're vulnerable is substantially less. So that's going to incentivize people, in theory, right? This is all theory. This is not how EVE players may take these changes. Is in theory, you're going to be more willing to go out in this shiny blingy ship. And since you're more willing to go out there and make that money, where someone else is making a lot less, you're going to be taking your blingy ship to make a lot more, risk versus reward. And you have a chance of dying, but it's not like a massive chance of dying. So they just want to force those types of interactions. I was also reading Ashy Paws or Ashy in Space, I think is her blog. She does amazing theory crafting work, nice posts. I really like it. She was testing this on the test server and says now a Marauder fit in a certain way can solo C5 sites in wormholes, where before people were using essentially Hodreds, or as Amelia said, like 2 Leshaks and an Esther or something like that. People would just dual box that. Now you can single box it and make almost 700 million ISK an hour, just completely solo. Obviously, you're in a wormhole. You can die if people want to catch you.
Just to address that point directly, the money making, with avoiding specific numbers like 700 million an hour, but like to address that and the less risk, just use Leshak's Nest or whatever. The quantity of hulls in space that you have to use to accomplish something, is important, because it means another character, whether it belongs to you or someone else, having more power concentrated in a single hull definitely makes things better. Like, you can solo it, sure, or you can even, you could bring 3 ships like you were before and go even faster. It just allows more configurability.
But the problem is, historically, CCP do not actually fix or rebalance on the actual PvE content. They try to fix things by fixing ships, right? They don't fix the faucets, they fix the actual cups. So unless they start looking at fixing some of those things so the payouts are not ridiculously high, these things will
wormhole payouts. Wormhole payouts are actually pretty good, because the payout rate is not what people think it is. It's actually the spawn rate, because that's the overall bottleneck for wormhole profit. Because everybody could clear every single site that ever spawned. It's not like there's just more to get, like Abyss, where there's always more. So there's a fixed, like, the spawn rate is the spawn rate. That's the faucet, and CCP is satisfied, for as far as I can tell, with where that blue loot faucet is.
The point is, you don't want to give the EVE players a bigger shovel, because they will literally dig themselves all the way to China. That's what we've been doing.
All this is like, so everybody, the site spawn, people scoop up all the sites. And all this is going to do is make it easier to do that.
All this discussion goes on. Check out Talking in Station's Discord, and we can definitely keep this discussion going for a long time. But let's move on, because there's a lot of other changes to do. Marauder changes are in flux based on some feedback, and keep looking out for how that gets finalized. Elise, what can we go to next, do you think?
So these were just like the small parts of the changes that were announced, right? The big meat of it, the one that people were really curious about, is the fleet formations patch that's coming in, right? We saw it in the trailer. People were saying, is this going to be just cosmetic? What's it going to be like? And CCP Rise and CCP Signal, they released a lot of information on it. And they also told people, like, hey, it's going to be on the test server. You can test it out. We want you to test it out. Come on Tuesday. I think it's the 23rd. But essentially, they said, hey, this is what it's going to be like. Everyone right now will be able to do the same fleets that they do currently, right? You can just go in this little ball. They call it, I think they called it the point formation. So they're not going to like remove that. They're just adding things on top of it. And it's actually locked behind a skill that fleet commanders, wing commanders, and squad commanders will have to have trained in order to unlock certain formations. So one of the formations, it's like a straight line, and you can dictate the distance between all of the ships, right? So there's like a little granular knob that you can turn in there in your fleet window settings. Say, oh, I want all my ships 5 kilometers apart, or oh, I want my ships all 10 kilometers apart. Then there's like the cube, and there's the Mighty Duck Flying V formation, which they said, hey, we kind of just did this because it looks cool. We don't really anticipate anyone using it for practical reasons, because in a fleet, it doesn't quite make sense to have half of your fleet in range and half of your fleet out of range, but whatever, it's cool. Take some cool pictures. And then there's like the freeform mode. And this is what's going to drive the theory crafters into just not sleeping for weeks on end, right? Because this is where all of the cool stuff happens. Essentially what happens is within 200 kilometers of the person initiating the warp, they take a snapshot of what that looks like on that grid, and that's what flies through space, and that's exactly how it lands. And so some of the implications of this, I was talking to Bjornby about it, who got almost giddy with excitement, right? And other people, I know Capco was mentioning it, and other people on Reddit. It allows you to do cool things, right? So you can have your FC in the middle, you can have a scout ship 151 kilometers away from him in an interceptor, and you just warp in those chunks, and your fleet will always be able to warp to that scout interceptor, regardless of what happens, right? So you land, you're like, oh shit, the bad guys are coming at us. Oh, I can warp to this guy. And you can kind of like infinity do these leapfrog type maneuvers if you wanted to. And that's just the very tip of the iceberg. That's just looking at this information for 5 seconds saying, how can I break this? And so there's so much cool things that you can do. I'm sure the FCs on this panel and the people on this panel can come up with some even more broken stuff. But that's kind of the net of it. That's really the exciting part behind this feature. It's definitely not cosmetic. It's going to completely change how this game works. Whether it's going to be a good thing or bad thing, you can argue about that, but it's definitely going to completely and fundamentally change how things work.
I think it's going to allow fleets to get really creative and have a lot of fun with some creative tricks and tactics.
I can't agree enough with you, Elise, is that basically, this is a lot different than changing values on, removing the MWD bonus on hacks. It's completely meta breaking and how people are going to fight around this. For my kind of play style, it pretty much neuters it completely. So with the current implication of it, you're able to warp 200 kilometers, up to 200 kilometers in front of your fleet mates, which means that range control no longer matters. You can have stuff landing on top of you no matter where you are. It's like the actual nano kind of small gang play style that I play in is completely dead if this change goes to live. That's kind of sad.
Well, just to say something about the blue sky thinking, because in Hilmer's interview, he talked about things that they do still want to see if they can do down the line, things like occlusion and collision and all these things, right? And he hooked the whole formation thing to how do we move forward and keep modernizing the game. And he also mentioned things like what they might be able to do with the Hadean software, right? So they have long-term plans for these things, right?
I strongly suggest that everyone listen to CCP Rise and CCP Signal talking about this on Pando's podcast. But just to get a few things that are kind of like the commonly asked questions about this that was answered. One of the more common questions that I heard was, how are warp bubbles going to affect this? And it's actually got an amazingly hilarious answer. So if a warp bubble, so every ship will be like warp independently, right? So it's not like you're going to follow the FC no matter what and go through bubbles and break stuff. if your ship would have gotten stuck by a bubble or interdicted somehow, it will. So if you're flying in a straight line and there's a bubble over here, these guys over here, they're screwed. But the best part of it is that because the formation is going to, or because of how it works, you will actually be able to see the distortion that a bubble causes while you're in warp. So if your FC makes a mistake and warps you through a bubble and breaks your formation, while you're in warp, you will see that distorted formation. So you will know that you're landing in a bubble and your FC screwed up. So you have this like 40 seconds, maybe more if you're in tie-dye, to just curse your FC and be like, oh shit, we're all gonna die, guys. Oh shit, we're all gonna die, as you're going through this whole thing. Some people have speculated that like bombers now won't be nearly as effective, right? Because you can warp with a Hictor bubble or a Hictor in the middle, everyone else 30 kilometers around them, and warp in like that. So your initial warp in, you can't really be bombed. But some other bomber FCs have said, hey, the hardest part about everything is setting everyone up to get the non-overlapping bomb runs. And now I don't really have to do that. I can just get everyone set up in a safe spot in the orientation that's correct. I don't have to worry about making hundreds of bookmarks. I can just warp in, do bomb, and warp off. It's great. So really, lots of options here. And to Amelia's point about how this is going to kill playstyles, CCP did mention that they're kind of thinking about this too. Rise specifically said, hey, I think I might have just broken stuff by making something way too powerful. So there are options that they can do to kind of negate that a little bit. So that 200-kilometer snapshot that we were talking about, they can make it 100 kilometers, right? So still oppressive, but not nearly as oppressive. It doesn't do the little warp skip bubble trick thing. It doesn't necessarily completely kill nanos. They can even make it like 30 kilometers, right? So there's lots of options there.
Rise did have that. So Rise did have that look like a toddler that had accidentally knocked something over, because I don't think they know what's going to happen with all this. Go ahead, Amelia, then Suetonia.
I just think I'm really surprised that they're still allowing you to warp, past your fleet mate. So with the current EVE, as everyone knows, you can warp to them at range in the direction that you're coming from. But now with this implication that you can kind of warp in a negative distance to that. So I think if they kept the formations but just allowed it so that it would still be in that same plane where you can't warp past them, it would still be a great change and still keep other playstyles alive.
I mean, that just means that the guy in front has to be the one that hits warp.
Yeah, but they can only warp to the person who's already in front, so you can't warp past that person that you're warping to, if you know what I mean.
Yeah, so you just pick the guy in front to be the one who does the work, and then you can do whatever formation you want.
I still think that one of the important takeaways, especially from the Pando stream, was Pando's comment on how this new feature is going to add so much potential for human error, which is really good for the game.
So this follows in the vein of the past several years, where CCP has been adding a layer of mastery, a layer of tactical and strategic decision making that did not exist before. That just
the thing about that
changes everything.
The thing about that, Fonsui, and they said this during the broadcast, was they want to increase mastery, right? Because that would distinguish players one from another. But isn't this mastery more FC mastery rather than other player mastery?
Don't FCs deserve that? And don't you think that this tool existing now will breed better FCs going forward?
This makes things even less. It basically makes only FCs and basically makes the N+1 blob significantly more be the meta, because you don't need to worry about spiraling in your tackle anymore. You don't need to worry about manually piloting or anything. All you're going to be worrying about is and is it really going to change anything with your mutant blobs or anything? You're going to still warp to your anchor up.
If the FC does everything perfectly, then you're right. But this introduces the opportunity for someone to make better decisions than someone else.
But to use a sports analogy, this is basically just playbooks, right? It doesn't say anything about what happens once the position starts actually moving. So sure, you have this. In soccer, it's like you're playing 5-4-2 or something in your setup. but it doesn't say anything about how it actually plays out once you are on the field. So sure, the formation is where you land, but mastery from an individual level that's not FC based is still going to happen after that. And you can do a lot of interesting pre-planned plays and post-landing plays that is going to be the whole level of mastery combined with FCs and the actual pilot.
What do you think, Suetonia?
Well, I kind of agree with Amelia. I think this pretty much like completely kills Nano on a grid against a larger gang, because you, instead of like people probing you and then fleet warping them onto you at 0 and you being like 20-30 kilometers away by the time they land, now they're just going to fleet warp to you with guys already 50 kilometers up front, and then they're just going to land on you in front of you like at 20 kilometers, and there's nothing you can do. You can't turn around in time, and the only place you're going to be able to fight a gang is going to be to go to an ESS grid because it's dead space, and that's about it.
So doesn't the FC have to get the alignment right for which way you are from the object that they're warping to? So they have to get that alignment right. They have to communicate to the tackler or whatever part is going to be the extension which direction they have to go and get that right. And then they have to warp on you and not change direction. Like it's
easy to screw up.
It's really only one step.
To do it. You just need, all you need to do, right, is you just make a separate squad. You put the squad commander in a probing ship, and you just get 5 Atrons, whatever the fuck tacklers you're using, and you put one of the Atrons 10 kilometers from it, one of the Atrons 20 kilometers from it, one of the Atrons 30 kilometers from it, one of the Atrons 50 kilometers from it, and then the FC just fleet warps these Atrons, or not the FC, that squad command just keeps probing and fleet warping those Atrons to the probe result at 0, and there's literally nothing you can do about it. And the Atrons don't even have to control their ships or burn in. If they land next to you, they scram you, and that's it. And you cannot kite anymore. It's not hard to do. The Atron pilots don't need to do anything. They don't need to communicate anything. All they need to do is warp to the guy who puts YYY in fleet at whatever range that they want to go to. That's it. There's no skill involved in it.
All right, Amelia, can you chime in on that?
I completely agree with Suetonia. It's basically you're catching a wide net, and it makes it so that as long as you have more players now, like it was already pretty hard to fight the blob, don't get me wrong, but like even now this change is going to make it so that you can't kite whatsoever. I agree with Antonio completely. We're going to be fighting on DED grids only, basically, because there's really no way to do this. If you have 2, even 3, you don't even need 5 people, and you don't even need a FC, right? You can still warp relative to someone even without that squad formation thing. So it doesn't really matter where you are. It's going to change it completely. If you're a solo player, if you're a small gang player, as long as you're not in a significantly large fleet, which is pretty ironic considering this is what they're marketing it to, is towards the large blobs, where this isn't even going to change anything really. The only thing that's going to change is towards bomber runs and maybe warping your Logi differently than your DPS, because you're going to anchor up afterwards when you land anyways.
Wow.
I think so. There's a lot of factors to it, right? And someone did have a question in chat, said, "Hey, does this affect coming in through a bridge or taking a Sino?" The short answer is no, right? This is only for taking gates. But the long answer is kind of. CB Signal mentioned that they have what is essentially a new Sino module that it's already built, it's already authored, it's ready to go. They just haven't really put it in yet because they want to see how this works first.
This is for warps. They're looking at jumps.
Yeah, so they do have something for jumps that's already built where you can jump in a specific formation, right? Which is hugely important for something like Super Capital and Titan fights. Imagine being able to jump into a grid and being able to say for certain that you will not bounce, right? Because that's one of the big scary parts of jumping in. But that's something that's somewhere down the road. Maybe it's possible. It's done. It's just they're not sure how they feel about it, which does go to show that hopefully they're willing to make changes, or at least quick changes to how this fleet formation will work. Like I said, it is locked behind a skill, so people will need to train that skill. It's not like a huge train or anything.
Amelia,
there's also a few details that I think we're missing out on, right? The fact that the order in the fleet will actually be pretty locked to the position in the actual formation that you choose, right? So you could actually see a meta moving away from uniform fleets and actually to composed fleets. So you strategically use the formation for how you want your composite fleet to actually look when it lands, right? This does open the door for whole new types of meta that we have never seen before. This is why, sure, we can discuss these things, but I don't think we really have a clue of the potential until it's in the wild and being actually used.
Is there any situation where you would actually want mutants to not be on top of each other anchored?
A lot of the times you kind of want them 30 kilometers away from an anchor, right? Especially if you're fighting on a citadel grid. You don't want to be at the point of something. If you're worried about being bombed, you don't want to be all lumped in together. Even if you're going quite fast, you can still get bombed, void bombed, and then the people that get void bombed die. So a lot of formations, I suspect, will be kind of like this sphere type thing where they have one FC or one Hector in the middle, then everyone 20 or 30 kilometers around that. Right, so when you land, you instantly bubble up, and so bombers can't really get that total hell wipe on you when you enter a grid. Similarly, the pancake formation that the Pappy have been using to shoot Fortizars and stuff, where they all basically go up and look like a pancake, you can now warp as that pancake onto for Citadel grids, things like that. It will absolutely change quite a lot. As you guys are mentioning, though, it does. These home defense fleets are going to get really good at catching solo players, nano players, 5 to 15 man fleets, because they're just going to be able to warp essentially just a net at you, right? If you come into this system and these guys, it doesn't take too long to prepare it, just to have this grid essentially of T1 frigates or interceptors, even worse, right?
They can warp a grid onto the grid.
Exactly, right? You just warp this spider net onto someone and they're dead, right? There's no like feathering out of a range or anything. There's really no changes that you can make. You are throwing 20 pilots at a pilot. Right now, sometimes that doesn't work. With this fleet formation, it's definitely going to work. And so that type of playstyle is going to have to, I hate to say it's going to have to adapt, right? But it is definitely going to be hurting, to you guys' point.
So that's kind of where I was. So what Caleb said originally was where my brain went right away, obviously. I was like, what can we do with this? What changes? What more can we do? And then, of course, Amelia and Suetonia's point is obviously 100% correct. Like, there's no denying that these tactics now exist. So it's going to crush certain types of gameplay. The question is, overall, what is the impact that this is going to have?
And I have not heard anyone talk about what this means regarding new AoE-centric weapon designs and things like how Titan Doomsdays interact with fleets on field and how structure weaponry interacts with fleets on field. Everyone seems to go back to talking about things we already have and not what this can actually do.
Yeah, so this unlocks a ton of potential, right? So a lot of FCs are not necessarily theory crafters, and a lot of theory crafters definitely aren't FCs. But there is a conversation that takes part between them where someone says, hey, what is this going to make? And then there are also FCs and theory crafters who their brains just go wild thinking about the implications of this, thinking about what this can be, what this can do. I'm sure Asher is having the time of his life right now saying, how can I break this to just break the back of my enemy in a way that they don't understand yet, because I'm, a theory crafter type person. And these guys, I was talking to Bjornby about it too. He was so giddy with excitement. Like, I'm sure he just falls asleep. His brain goes crazy. He goes, writes something down, goes back to sleep, stuff like that. It absolutely, completely, fundamentally changes how PvP works in EVE, or how PvP can work in EVE. And I think Pando actually makes a really good point as well. We mentioned it before. I like to refer to EVE pilots as mistake machines, right? So the goal is always to try and make your enemy screw up more than you screw up. That's how I view FCing. It's probably like a perverted version of it, right? I'm sure actual FCs will just I use actual tactics. I don't wait for my enemy to screw up. But no, I just try to make fewer mistakes while encouraging my enemies to make more mistakes. And I think this unlocks a lot of potential to completely screwing up. One of the nice things about it, and I'll shut up about this afterwards. One of the nice things about this that we're not really talking about too much is it's now a lot easier, not foolproof, but it's now a lot easier to get a fleet onto a grid without it getting hell bombed or pipe bombed or just completely wiped out before it has a chance. This is something that, at least when I was FCing, I could always count on taking advantage of a younger FC, not taking precautions to get bombed or completely screwed in this way. And I know a lot of FCs, their careers ended before they started because they didn't take this into account. They didn't really know what to do. They had so many things going on, they just forgot about it. They warped their fleet to a point that entire fleet died before they could do anything, oftentimes before their fleet even loaded grid. And those people don't want to join that FC anymore, right? That guy could be like Mr. V Jr. and we'll never know because everyone that joined his fleet that first time was like, man, this guy sucks. I don't want to join this guy's fleet anymore.
Well, I just have one question to the FCs in the room, if I may. When it comes to weaponry like the new Sappy Boy and things that are conditioned on almost an AoE or on the grid, right? So how far can the Sappy Boy jump between ships? Mechanics like that can suddenly now be developed if we know how these weaponries are actually working, right? So is it jumping in a cone behind the direction that it originates? What's the range? Is there supposed to be a range difference between, say, the small version, the medium, and large, and of course the actual structured Doomsday one? And this will be sensitive to what you do with your formation when you choose the shape and the range, right? There's so many things that CCP can actually do now with these types of weaponry, and everyone seems to just be talking about this from a turret point at target and shoot point of view, and then of course mentioning bombs. But those are not the only AoE things that we can see in the future being massively important to the game.
The applicability of Vortons now is like that is a brilliant point, frankly. Like this is everyone was dogging them for so long, and like they, I think someone found the use for them recently, but like for the most part, people really were not using these things, and this kind of puts them in play without changing the weapon system at all.
How does this put them in play? If anything, it nerfs them more, doesn't it not? Because you can stay spread out? I'm sorry.
I mean,
it gives you options.
What options? You're just hitting less targets.
You can control where your Vortons land.
Yeah, but you're never going to be on top of the enemy anyways, right? Like, and even if you are on top of the enemy, then you don't have control. So I don't see how it gives you control whatsoever.
I'm not going to pretend to know exactly how it can be applied, but the ability.
Well, again, if the directionality is sensitive, right? So if something like the origin of the vector that the Sappy Boy, the Voltron, actually creates, right? If where it then can jump on the other side, based on its original vector, is a cone, and if you're outside that cone, it doesn't actually jump, then something like the wall will become useful, right? There's so many things that they can do with these types of weapons. And again, back to the Doomsday weaponry, right? If you're trying to do a cone-shaped thing, then you would want to counter that with trying to get into a planar formation to not be hit in the same way. There's many things, and especially when you're talking about prolonged fights and I'd say bigger fleets, this opens the doors for massive new designs from CCP, and I'm pretty sure that's the whole intention. And we have talked about this for almost 15 years, right? I found a post from 2006, 2007. This has been mentioned so many times, and it is a requirement if we even want to start talking about things like occlusion, collisions, proximity mines, all these fun things in the game.
Yeah, and the ability to choose where to place an AoE weapon is a tool in the toolbox regardless. I'm not trying to sell this as a silver bullet or say that, like, yeah, now this is what the new meta and nobody is going to use anything. All I'm saying is this is on the table, whereas before it was like universally panned.
Suetonia and Amelia, both of you guys are familiar with Small Gang. So I'm wondering, from your sense, is fleet formations a problem for small gangs, or do you guys like this change?
It's mostly going to be a problem for small gangs trying to fight larger home defense gangs outnumbered or with bigger stuff, because essentially there's a very easy way to set this up. It doesn't require much. It doesn't require any skill from the tacklers whatsoever. The only person who needs skill is the FC, and by skill I mean he has to have like 4 bookmarks on a gate, and like right-click fleet warp result to probe result. There's no skill involved in it whatsoever, and it pretty much prevents you from burning away and cutting on a gate when you're outnumbered, because Atrons, Jaguars, whatever the tackle ships might be, they don't need to do anything except for warp to the FC, who warps to the appropriate bookmark, and that's it. So it's going to kill fighting small gang fighting larger gangs home defense style like that. It will probably be useful for small gangs for cutting and catching people out, because again it is going to be broken, right? Like if you have some guy like 180 kilometers off a gate, you can just that's burning off a gate, for example, in a stiletto, some eyes or something, you can just warp ships in a way where you'll land in front of it and then just turn around and kill it. So I mean, you'll be able to kill a lot more people who are being bad or being weird on gates, because I assume most small gangs will be able to take advantage of this. So a few more kills, but it'll probably kill content for most small gangs.
Amelia?
I mean, I agree with everything Sutonio said. It's basically going to only really affect if you're fighting against a blob as a small group. And if you're ever be using it as a small group, it's mostly going to be, as he was saying, catching snipers out or things like that. But, in almost every setting, we never fleet warp, right? So it's always going to be people manually. So that never really changes anything compared to the large fights where, we can have our one Logi warp at range manually. We don't need him to have an FC to set the range at which the Logi wing is going to go to or something like that.
All right. And Hateless, I want to bring you back into this. We know you specialize in PvE, basically. You're a confessed Care Bear. But is this going to affect your gameplay at all?
There's a couple of creative things I can think of. Being able to put for example, the fleets that I run on Fridays, we do anti-trig fleets, and being able to put the nesters in a specific spot, or being able to put the Logi in a specific spot, and have the DPS in another spot, means that we can kind of control a few of the factors that the NPCs do, and would allow us to optimize a little bit, but there's nothing that will, in Fonsui's word in the private chat, game changing. There's nothing really game changing in there, but the ability to do that and to pre-position the fleet as it lands on grid is something that I can see being very creative. But for things like incursions, where you have to go through a gate after the first gate, it's definitely not going to really help them a whole lot. And then there's not really a whole lot of other fleet activity in HiSec, and in like PvE, you generally do it alone and to farm for ISK.
Are you about to demonstrate something on your camera?
No, my cat stepped on my stream deck. I'm sorry.
Okay. There you go. You're back.
He's demonstrating the joys of feline ownership.
Oh, we saw that you got a sub or something. Or actually, we saw a fish pop up on screen. Maybe your cat was summoning a fish.
No, somebody was
Magikarp.
talking, and that was
all right.
Magikarp. Okay. It's not a fish. It's a carp.
Oh, okay. Wait, carp. Did you finish what you were saying though, or?
Yeah. I got everything out.
All right. We're missing our mining chief was supposed to be here. But he's not. But I wonder if there's some implications that you guys can imagine for people who do mining fleets. And I'm talking about maybe even ults. Yeah,
I would call this a quality of life improvement across the board, but in a small way, not in like, oh my God, this changes everything.
But specifically for mining, I think Hateless had. Were you going to say something, Hateless?
Yeah, miners will love this. They generally have to get to rocks and spread out, and a lot of belts are shaped in a predictable way, so you can kind of spread the fleet out, mine, go to the next belt, repeat, go to the next belt, and without having to move a whole lot, and that'll make mining a lot better. So
this can be applied tactically and strategically as well for defensive purposes.
Oh yeah, definitely.
But the mining belts are in crescent shapes, right? So you always have to jump to the beacon and then kind of putt over to the rocks. And so I'm thinking of normal belts. So maybe this allows you to bring your skiffs in a crescent shape around your hauler, and
already aligned, ready to start mining.
During the invasion, there was quite a bit of thought put into, how to approach, the Triglavian sites for mining, and like what chips to use and how to position them, and the best way to get them from here to there. Like all sorts of tricks were used, like a warp on grid, like a secondary warp after you land and stuff like that. And there was a lot of planning. So this being an additional tool for something like that, I could definitely see being useful for efficiency purposes for quality of life.
Yeah, and Eagle here says, miners will also be terrified as gang fleets can instantly warp Hicks and Sabers onto the moon belt. And basically, this is moving too fast, but and basically bubble the whole group of them.
Well, I mean, combat exist. And that was half the discussion with the PvP thing.
Okay. Fonsui, what about inside of Pochvan or any of the Triglavian content, or even
So I mean, anywhere that you're able to warp, this is going to change things. And I think the only kind of content in Pochvan is small gang, isn't it?
My understanding is that they're having a ball in there, and this will probably help them have a better ball.
Yeah, like so. That's actually. I mean, maybe that's where small gang lives now. I mean, I don't think that's enough, or that it's quote unquote fair necessarily. Yeah. But like, maybe it's not entirely gone.
All right.
There are some of the neat implications of this. We're talking about, say, hey, this makes it so the FC has basically complete control of everything now. They can do everything. They're going to be like just this 5-head type guy playing chess over here. But it also gives a little bit more agency to wing commanders and squad commanders. Like the guys that are going to be in the tackle wings, they're going to need a squad commander. They're going to have all their dictors in a squad command, or in a certain squad, and that guy is going to be in charge of warping them in a certain like spider web formation to catch as many people as they can, stuff like that. So it does give agency to more than just the fleet commanders. It does give more roles to people within the fleets, right? As a possible positive here.
Real quick,
one of the interesting, I think one of the more interesting things that people have talked about is that grid formation that they've talked about. You can now sino like your capitals onto a fort, and then warp them before they bounce. So they're like perfectly positioned in this cool little grid, and you can do stuff. So that's one of the things that someone just spoke to me about for capital things. Kind of changes everything, right? So we're not just talking about subcaps. We're not just talking about small gang or big gangs. This is every type of fleet gets affected by this.
You know what I want to see? I want to see the first time it gets used defensively by a spy or something, where you just deliberately try to like squad warp off a group or wing warp off a group into like a really terrible formation somewhere. Like just put them in like a big fat wall, like line formation, so that they're like on the opposite side. Like some of the tie-ins end up being like on the opposite side away from a fax or something, so they just don't get any reps and they just get dunked.
That would be
opportunities for fuckery are high.
I love it.
Okay, Maxi Mouse, you guys probably know the answer to this. Will the fleet be able to warp past the warp point, as this would negatively affect small gangs?
Yeah, that's what we just talked about.
As we understand it right now, the answer is yes. 1,000,000% yes. That doesn't mean that that's how it's going to be. That doesn't mean they can't make some changes. I can't imagine that one will be easy to avoid.
Yes, small gang versus larger gang is not going to be pretty for a while. Small gang versus small gang may be different.
Well, I can see. So generally, small gang guys are. I'm being very general here, but should be pretty upset about this then, as Suetonia kind of demonstrates.
I mean, my group is pretty much livid about it. It's going to be unable to play unless we're fighting on an ESS grid practically if this change goes live. It's actually really, really sad to see. Because we almost
like
we specialize in like fighting the blob.
Right.
If you had to design either.
Hold on.
Sorry.
Fonsby, sorry, hold on a second. But let's have that counter suggestion, like.
Well, I was going to ask, to theorize how to make this work.
Do you, well, not how to make it work, but is it don't put this in, or is it you need to put some limitations on it that are stricter? Or...
Yeah, that's exactly
what I was saying earlier. It's basically so instead of having them warp basically past the target that you're warping to, right, with that fleet formation thing, just make it so that you can only warp in the other direction. So you can't, like how it is currently, you can't warp past a target, right? You can either warp to the target or at range from the target from the direction you're coming in. They should keep that in order with the fleet formations.
So let's say that they made that change, and then I just go and make sure that the guy that I want to be in the front is the one who initiates the warp. Now I still keep my formation.
Yes, but you're never landing past the target.
Yeah, I see what you're saying. Yeah, you can't extend beyond that point.
So do you not think that this might open your toolbox as well as their toolbox, or do you think it's just a hard no for you?
It's very hard. I see what you're saying about how we can adjust to it.
There's
hold on a second. Hold on. We can't hear multiple people at the same time because technically you guys muffle each other out. So Fonsby, please hold on a second. Let's let Amelia answer that question.
I haven't been trying to.
Whoever was trying to talk.
But with any change, yes, something's going to change with small gangs. But isn't there a way that you can get creative? It might take you a minute, but isn't there, instead of just rolling over and saying this is bad, don't you think that there's maybe a tool or trick that you can develop to counter that play style or counter that thing? Because there's got to be something. It just might take you time to develop it.
The only counter is the fight on a dead space grid.
Yeah, it feels very much like this is really like there's no way around this for this particular gameplay style. So what I wanted to ask was, so you proposed one specific limitation. Do you feel that would be enough, or does this need more of a tweak to say that you still can't push anyone past the warp in point that you had before?
That would be completely enough. It would be as if the change really didn't affect us at all then, which would be great. We would love to see something like that.
So it sounds like we get to have our cake and eat it too, if they do what you suggested.
Yep. I don't know if you have different thoughts on that, Antonio.
So say the formation was an arrow, just for easy visual. I can't say it. You guys know what I mean. Say the formation was an arrow and the FC was in the back of the arrow, and the FC warps to a grid after combat probing you down. You're saying the nose of the arrow should land where the probe was.
Yes, so the thing you probed.
Edge. So then the FC doesn't land where the probe is, but the nose should end. The furthest point forward should land where the combat probe was.
Yeah, so the FC would be at a negative distance from the way he came from.
You want a wall. You want a wall, and the point of the formation does not go beyond this wall.
Yeah, the way it currently works, or it could be like the FC still warps to 0, but then the arrow gets compressed down, right? So the people who are in front of him just end up next to him or on the same plane.
Well, it's more the tangent of the theoretical sphere will be the point from which the formation extends, right? So that point can never actually fly past the target that you're warping to.
So the closest ship in the formation will be the nose.
So what Suetonia has just pointed out is actually interesting. So there are two ways to accomplish. If you put in a wall, there are two ways to use it. Either the formation would remain intact and the lead ship in the formation would simply stop at the wall, or the formation would become compressed and deformed. And that second option of deforming the formation and ruining it adds another element of mastery. Like the FC has to know where to warp in his formation if he wants to retain his formation.
What if that's an option when you enter the warp? Because they did say that there'd be options that you can choose, and maybe one of them would be to collapse the formation upon landing on it, and one could be to keep it the way it is.
It sounds like, frankly, that the players who are affected by this, small gang players, should be campaigning for this specific change to be made, because it sounds that there's general consensus that the feature can be useful, can be interesting, is kind of punishing to this specific gameplay, which is valuable, but that can be preserved if it is slightly tweaked.
Well, Misaki says it's the best TIS stream ever, and I take offense to that because I'm not talking at all. But all right, it is the best ever because we have some brainy guys here talking, and we have a cat who's running the board apparently over at.
Would you guys say that that's a fair assessment? I don't want to just say that's the truth.
I mean, either way, it doesn't matter. Like, if you can't walk past the point, then there wouldn't be like any issues really from Small Gang about this.
Did we just reach a compromise? Like,
be vocal. Yeah, be. So everyone should be vocal because like everyone seems to agree right now.
Yeah, I think that's probably. And so here's the crappy part about this is we might have just come to this amazing conclusion and compromise, and it might already be how it works. We don't know exactly for sure how it works. But I mean, that does seem reasonable. Don't let anyone warp like past that one point, right? Don't let that net be able to be cast as wide and as far ahead. So that's a pretty neat thing. I don't think it would break any of the cool features that FCs were coming up with, except for that one kind of giga broken one where you have that interceptor 152 kilometers away from you or 151 away from you. So whenever you warp, you can always just leapfrog to that thing and create new things.
Well, J-Time says, amazing conclusion that makes formations completely useless as necessary, LOL. They still look good.
Make them... I still think that they'd be useful.
There's still tons of uses. Like the only thing it would take away basically would be the like permanent interceptor perch thing. But even then, like it doesn't really change too much because you can still get a guy to burn away in an interceptor.
I mean, what's it take? Like 20 seconds for an interceptor to go make a ping for the fleet to warp to?
Yeah, roughly about that. But that's kind of an important 20 seconds. Like just removing that is kind of broken. So it does seem like this type of thing does remove a lot of the abuses that the players have theory crafted. Okay, I don't want to say abuses, but some of the more wonky elements that the players have thought about, while maintaining the cool strategy involved for using these fleet formations and the cool potentials for what it could do, right? So we're talking about you can still warp in a sphere, you can still warp in a grid, you can still do all this cool stuff, you can still have certain formations that'll work for battleships, certain different formations that you'll want for hacks, and certain different formations that you'll want for interceptors and stuff like that, without kind of having this oppressive just complete grid net control of a grid by just warping wherever you want with very little skill involved.
All right. Okay. So fleet formations. Any last thoughts that are burning? Otherwise, we'll move on to a couple other changes.
Yeah. I want to know if they've calculated the time to pings yet. Because any feature that puts into a game, they have to wonder, how long before someone turns it into something inappropriate, and that's TTP, and it's a respected metric.
They mentioned this. Signal mentioned this. He's like, yeah, I know what's going to be flying around Jita all day, every day. Yeah. There's going to be a flying
TTP. Yeah. All right.
And it's also going to be the Moonpire guy who is going to be dropping the cans.
That inside joke that you guys
no comment.
Yeah, that inside joke that you guys may or may not know is TTP is time to penis, which means that any tool you give players, there will be some equation to how fast they can turn it into a penis.
I still think that CCP should have made that as a dev tool that they already have in the selection. So it's a selection that devs and game masters can actually use.
It's that should be
the level 5 level 5 unlock. It should just be the penis formation.
Can we just have a mushroom shaped formation, please?
Okay. So let's move on to some of these other. Yeah. Let's move on to this other couple other things that might be big deals, or they might not. The mobile sinusoidal field. What do you think?
This one.
Go ahead.
Okay, so CCP is putting in a new module, so deployable. It's not a module. It's essentially acts like a regular Sinistro field does, but it doesn't require a ship. It's like a mobile depot where you place it down. It doesn't have as many restrictions as a mobile depot, though, so you can put it on a structure. There's one or two areas that I'm really concerned about it, and there's another area that I'm really, really happy about. So the thing that I really like is the fact that we now have once CCP took out the ESS structure, there's now a new structure that you can just throw up, and it puts up like a public beacon in a system, which is really cool if you want to do like diamond rat traps or like baiting people to like come into like a DD site or something like those. That's pretty cool use for it. The concern that I have for it right now is it takes like an hour. It has like an hour duration apparently, and I think that's way too long really, because otherwise you can kind of bring back the umbrellas a little bit. If you have like 10 rockles in a belt or something, you just have one up next to the rockles, and if it lasts for an hour, it's gonna be there the entire time.
Just throw a second one down.
Yeah, and when you have like 9 or 10 people there, it costs 20 mil according to CCP Rise approximately. Obviously they're going to tweak the values, but like 20 mil split 10 ways isn't really that much, is it? Like losing 2 mil each from your raw call for the hour, it isn't really too much. And maybe we'll see like kind of like the old umbrellas come back a little bit, which is a little disappointing, but otherwise I think it's a really cool idea because I think Sinistro feels like one of those like really old mechanics that are super boring and horrible old gameplay, kind of like how the old OGBs were. That the best place for your Legion boosting the fleet was not on grid, it was in a safe spot. And it's just a boring task that some FC or some guy just has to have a second client open in space, just running links. It's kind of stupid. That Sinos are, they can be fun and tactical in certain fights, but most of the time when you're traveling or, you just want to move a capital into your staging system, it's kind of boring to have to like log in another character and just have it sat there for 5 minutes.
So it relieves that duty, is what you're saying.
Yeah. So it's like you're taking like a really horrible gameplay. Like there's no gameplay in it, right? When you're lighting it for travel, just like delegating it to a mobile structure is really cool, because now some guy doesn't have to just like leave their characters stuck in space for 5 to 10 minutes.
So I have two concerns about it. By the way, I'm really excited about this. I'll be able to, logistically move around dreads and stuff to be able to use for PvE, which is insanely exciting for me. But the concerns I have is how big is it physically? What ships can it fit into? And the second concern that I have is how much health it has, alongside what its deployment duration is. So the time between when you drop it and when it actually lights up.
We actually know what the values are right now based on what CCP Rise said on Pando's chat. Obviously, they're probably going to change based on feedback, but CCP Rise said it would take 2 minutes to anchor, and it's 200 or 2 minutes where it's like going online. It's the same as like the old Sinistro inhibitor that used to be 2 minutes before they buffed it. And it's going to be 250 M3 cargo space, so you can probably fit it in most things that aren't like interceptors or like really fast frigates. So most cruisers can probably effortlessly put one in.
Is it going to require skills to deploy?
I think they said it does, but it's only like anchoring level 3, so it's not really it's not a big train. It's like 4-hour train or something.
No new skills.
No.
Well, from a Sino out, so right now, to move a combat capital around, you need a like an actual Sino ship, a Falcon or Force Combat Recon, or which one is it? I can't remember off the top of my head right now.
It's the Force Recons.
Force Recons. But you need one of those, and planting one of those on grid is a 5-minute commitment of a 200 to 300 million ship. It's a fairly big commitment for just moving a ship, where this is a much smaller commitment. And then what ships can actually deploy it is another thing, and that means that to train an alt to be able to move, say, a dread around, it's going to be significantly less skills required, and a venture can carry that, which just about anything can fly, and it's only like 2 skills to deploy.
So before like a year ago, it was, getting a Sino out there was very easy. And about a year ago or so, they made it very, very difficult. And this kind of makes it easy again, but not in the same way that it was easy before.
Well, I just don't understand why they have it be for an hour. Like, the change, I think, is good if it's for simply moving your capitals around. I think that's great. You shouldn't have to risk 500 mil ship, whatever it is, to do that. But why is it lasting for an hour? Why isn't it lasting one Sino cycle of 5 minutes or something like that?
I think it's so that you can go drop it and then go back to your capital and then jump to it.
Yeah, the kind of funny thing about this is it does actually let you move a capital solo now, or you could like move to where you want to jump to in a frigate, like a Heron or whatever that can carry it. Place the Sino down, then you go back to your dread and you jump to it and hope that there isn't like.
And hope that for the last hour, people haven't just clumped up at your Sino waiting for you.
Yeah, it would be a very terrible idea.
If you place it right, you land in the right place. You just dock up. It allows you to literally move your dreadnought without having an alt. It allows you to move your jump.
Putting your balls directly on the table, though.
I mean, it's hard to catch something that's land.
Let's get a couple things. Okay, let's get a couple things straight, though. You need an additive skill of Anchor 3. But you had to have the skills before that to light the Sino in the first place. Do those still stick?
I don't think you needed anchoring level 3, but anchoring level 3 is a very easy skill to train. And if you're using any other kind of deployables,
that's hours.
It's about the same. It's about the same, to put down a mobile jump beacon or whatever.
Right, so but do you have to have the ability to use a Sino? Do you need to have Sino? Go ahead.
I don't think so. Not right now. You don't need the Sino skill trained. It's just anchoring skill. Just like with the micro jump unit beacon, you don't need the micro jump skill. You just need anchoring.
So right now, to light a Sino for a combat capital, you need to. It's about 45 days of training to get into the Force Recon ship, roughly on an Omega account. And for training a industrial Sino, it's 5 days. I just made a bunch of alts to do this.
Yeah.
So.
And now you don't even need that.
Well, I didn't do the Falcon alts. I only have like 2 of those. But I mean,
no. But right. But the players won't even need to do any of that. They literally just need anchoring 3.
Yeah, and so that'll make making a Sino alt for logistical purposes really simple. And the fact that they have a delay between when it is anchored and when it activates, and then also that it's killable, it makes it so it's not quite like a Punisher that has 20,000 HP can light a Sino and then instantly something's jumping on you. It takes a moment. You can kill it. You can kill it before something comes through.
Got it. Our friend Omega Gold asks, how tanky is it? I don't know if we covered that.
CCB Rise said they were looking at around 40,000 HP, I think. He said it was about half a mobile inhib, but they were dropping it a little bit below that. The mobile inhib has like 200k HP roughly, I think. But I don't think they would put it at 100k. I think like 40, 50k, like around, that's where they said they would try, like a bit weaker than a mobile tractor unit. So... like if you
raised from chat a question, he says you can't deploy it near a station, so you can't use it for instant dock.
You can put it near a station.
You
can't drop a mobile depot, but CCP Rise said they deliberately took away the restrictions for this, so you can just put one down on your Fortizar or whatever, so people can just jump to it in range.
So he also said that you can put multiple ones down. He said you can put them like down like one after another right on top of each other, which is going to be, I think there's like a 2,000 kilometer range, he said, or something, or 2,000 meter range.
At least give us an overview, like 30,000 view on this thing.
So there's 2 parts to it, right? Because this is, of course, EVE players are going to break it. The first part you guys are talking about, it lets you move your capital ships without having to risk a 300 million-isk ship to do it. But the trade-off is these things explode at the end, right? You can't scoop it back up.
Fixed cost.
Exactly, right? So every time you move your capital, if you want to use one of these, it's going to cost you either...
You're paying fuel anyway. Like more fuel.
Exactly.
So at least get through.
You're spending that 4 millets that you're never going to get back, or you could risk using your Sino Rapier, which might not die. And there you go. So that's pretty cool. It also allows smaller groups to be able to deploy capitals a little bit, able to move capitals a little bit better, which I think this really does solve the problem between or of capital movement and free movement, right? You want to be able to travel with them pretty easily without having to unleash the wrath of suddenly your roaming gang has 100 carriers sitting on your face, right? So this does solve that solution, or solve that quite elegantly. The problem is going to be when you have like M2 type battles. And here's why I'm okay with it, right? Because the M2 type battles happen so infrequently anyways. But you're always going to be able to have a Sino to jump to. Imagine, put this in context with the fleet formations. You can warp in a grid with like 15 even ventures if you wanted to, in this perfect cube, go to a keep star, everyone lights one, and then you can jump in kind of diffused or however you want. So that's really cool. When the Sino Jammer goes up, these things can no longer be jumped to, so there are really no exploits that way. And it does remove like that cost of, this fleet fight is going to suck because I'm going to lose rapiers left, right, and center. And these things, they die pretty quick. They've got very little resist, so you can't keep them up. So I don't know. I don't think it's going to break anything. I do think it's just going to make a lot of things a little bit easier and a little bit less expensive and a little bit less daunting. So overall, I think it's just good changes all around. I'm sure players are going to come up with ways to abuse it, but I think the benefits are worth that risk.
I think the biggest problem is what Antonio brought up with the Rorquals and stuff like that. If people already have a Sino ready there to go, which lasts an hour long, right, with no cost to them, there's nothing to stop you from, if you come in, you get initial tackle, it takes a little bit for your gang to come in and, kill it, unless you're going to be Titan bridging on or something. Them already having that Sino up, you can't even put a Sino jammer down in time and things like that is very problematic, I think.
I mean you could just have an ult and a cloaked falcon or something, right? Isn't that what they do anyways?
Well, not necessarily, right? And these would feed the Falcon to the gang, instead of just having a 20 mil cost that's split between 10 guys, so it doesn't really matter.
So
but it's a cost that you're always going to incur, even though someone's not attacking you, right? So you're always losing 20 mil an hour instead of losing.
But it needs to run for 100 hours before it's more expensive than the Falcon.
Yeah, the cost of this is extremely minimal.
So I do have something to mention. Say you are hunting a Rorqual, and you have your stealth bombers that you're attacking with, or whatever you use. Something that can kill a Rorqual can kill one of these in 2 seconds.
It's about the time between your DPS lands and your tackle. So the thing is, if you land tackle, and then your gang's one jump away, they jump in, they warp to you. It's about the Sino already being up and being able to bridge in, or them to bring a fax in or whatever in. That's the problem, in my mind at least.
Well, then you're fed a fax, aren't you? If they just bring in one fax.
Well, you can't kill a fax, dude. You can kill the Sino, though, if the Sino goes up preemptively, most likely.
What does it take to kill a fax?
30k DPS. Probably more, depending on which one it is. I think even after the changes, an Apostle with a 2 bill fit can tank 60k DPS.
Okay. So one last thing. Alice Winfield says, drop it, clone jump to Sino. And McLeod makes that point. It's a massive quality of life improvement for capital players. I think that makes sense. All right. Let's move on to the last thing here. We may have talked about it a little bit before, but the wobble, right? The, what's the actual name? Now that I call it wobble, I can't think of it.
Stasis Revivification Probe.
Thank you. What do you guys think of that?
We talked about it a little bit early on, so they're increasing quite a bit. These things were hardly used for some time. They've been getting used a little bit more frequently. So it's interesting that this is when it's happening, as it's becoming a little bit more popular to use. Sutonia mentioned the increased radius is going to make bubble camps a little bit more daunting, right? Because you're going to be stuck in a wobble as you're trying to burn back to the gate. Before, when it's 10 kilometers, who cares? You're going to coast through it anyways. Now that it's 15 kilometers, you might not be able to coast through it so easily. It also increases the web effect. So I think it went from 30% to 50%, back down to 40% is what they're toying with now. Obviously, none of these numbers are set in stone. They can be changed. They'll be tweaked. And also the delay for putting it up is going up a little bit, or going down a little bit, so they come online faster. I think it's down from 3 seconds to 2 seconds. I might be wrong on that one. And in tandem with it, they're buffing up the interdictors themselves. So the flycatcher specifically and the Eris are going to be a lot more tankier, a lot more durable. I think the flycatcher just has so many cool things it can do. I think actually the flycatcher is going to benefit for like non-interdictor uses more than anything. So you'll, instead of flying around in a Saber, and obviously Suetonia can attest to this more, but right now if you're flying around in an interdictor solo, you're almost always picking a Saber. If you look at interdictors that are lost, they're Sabers because they're faster. They're almost always used. They do a certain amount of damage, etc. But now maybe the flycatcher is going to be king of the castle a little bit more. Just on what it can offer.
For solo PvP, the flycatcher was already the best interdictor in the game for like the last 4 years. But it just makes it even stronger, and especially buffs the people who use flycatchers as like light missile gliding ships, like 60, 70 kilometers, because they now have more tank than what they did have like 6 months ago without even having it with an MSC fitted, without an MSC fitted.
You're essentially flying a really fast caracol almost, right?
Yeah. The main thing with the flycatcher that makes it really powerful is it has like a 2k volley with light missile fit. So if you have like 10 of them, you can basically just like alpha people, and a lot of people underestimate flycatchers.
And you can get up to like 40, 50k EHP now. It's pretty insane on the flycatcher.
You said that Flycatcher was the best interdictor in the game, but you yourself called interdictors sabers. What's the difference there?
Oh, well, I mean, at least for fleet use before CCP buffed these other interdictors, Saber was obviously the one that every single person used because it had the best like speed and slot layout relationship. The Flycatcher only has one low and it's slower than the Saber naturally, so that's why it doesn't get used over the Saber generally. And then armor interdictors generally didn't really exist. The only one that was used other than the Saber was a Heretic with a combat probe launcher and a Sino as a hunting ship.
Interdictors are a niche ship. They're very, very special, use. So the racial flavors didn't create variation. They created a best one.
Yeah, and I think the Eris is now actually better than the Saber in every single way. Now that it has, the bonus that the Eris gets now is 20% reduction in plate. So it now has no mass penalty if you have Interdictors level 5. And you can get it to have more AHP and be faster and still have a similar agility to a Saber with double hyperspatial on both fitted. So it's now just flat better than the Saber. It also actually does a lot of damage as well, unlike a Saber 125s. The only difference between the Eris and the Saber is the Eris can't regenerate shields, whereas the Saber can. And obviously in some fleet situations, you're kind of warping in, dropping a bubble, overheating prop, and getting out, and then probably coming back in 3 minutes. So the Eris can't naturally regen its armor, obviously. But otherwise, the Eris is now just better than the Saber in every way.
And for smaller fleets too, I think the Eris is going to be really, really well received because you can keep it alive a lot better, right? You can dual prop it if you want to. So once you get onto a fleet, you can keep them bubbled a little bit longer, right? That thing becomes more survivable. So instead of dying to 10 ships while getting repped, it can now withstand up to 30 or 40 ships. So it's a lot more useful in the medium-sized fleets as well. It's really interesting to see that this is the direction they're taking to. I don't want to say this is how they're nerfing the Saber, but they're just bringing everything up to that type of level and giving you a little bit more options there for what you can do.
I just want to add to Fonsui's note. He does say that they're super specialized ship, but every fleet wants one. If you want to participate in fleets, the best thing to trade into is an interdictor. It'd get you in every fleet.
It will get you an enemy fleet, but it's probably going to get you yelled at if you screw up. I think they've got a really high skill ceiling, which is really like interesting to do and fun to do, right? Because you get to specialize in this role that actually becomes a specialized role, because the more often you do it, you are actually better than someone who has the skills trained but has never flown it before, right? Like your pilot skill does matter, even on the largest scales in ships like that.
It's a high pressure situation. It's a high pressure position. I think you better be good at it because you can really screw up your own fleet.
I think there are some sacred bonds in FCing, and one of that is the FC and the Scout. I think that's like a sacred bond where these guys have more or less like an unspoken communication. They're like how twins communicate, right? They've got some weird telepathy going on once you build a rapport. And the same is true with interdictors, right? Like if an FC has a Scout he can trust and an interdictor he can trust that can predict what he wants, that fleet is going to be incredibly successful compared to one that doesn't. Or compared to just Joe Schmo in a Scout ship and Joe Plumber in an interdictor, right?
All right. Okay, so let's move on to the last section here. Player news. What's going on with players? What are they doing? With a couple war zones. Let's start with Tribute. Tribute has fallen. It says here the fraternity and the group they were trying to evict from Tribute.
Hack changes.
What's that?
Hack changes.
Do you want to do hack change? I thought we did hack changes.
Did we kind of did at the start. We didn't like talk about them.
Sorry.
But we are going pretty long today, so
that's okay. This is important stuff. Let's do the hack changes. Go ahead, Suetonia.
Suetonia, you read it.
All right, sure. So the biggest thing and the thing that's going to change the most for everyone, of course, is the fact that they're removing the MW6 balloon bonus from hacks. So what that means, most likely, is that ships like the Munin, Cerberus, and Eagle, which people find to be the dominant part of the meta game in heavy assault cruisers, and one of the reasons why people were actually a little frustrated about the web probe bonus, I think, the CC buffing it, is because it actually hurt AHACs more, and AHACs are obviously a lot more risky to use, and they're actually kind of niche compared to like the regular MWD hacks like Munins, Eagles, and Cerberuses. But essentially what that will probably mean is that those MWDing hacks will take a little more damage from bombs if they do get bombed, although it's pretty hard to bomb them. But also, the main thing, though, right, is that it'll probably be easier to track them with larger weapons, such as battleships. So I don't know if you have Baltic fleets like Goons use, Megatrons and Balgons. Those will probably be a lot better at killing Munin fleets now.
So I have a question to Elise or one of the No Block F people. Does this really change anything with the amount of TPs that you would find in these type of grids with, Vigils or Hugins or whatever?
Wait, what are TPs? Describe that first.
Target painters.
Thank you.
So the thing with target painters is they're generally on platforms that are really easy to kill, and you can just knock them out pretty quickly. At least that's something I've always found whenever I'm fighting like with Munins. So if I'm fighting like a Baltic fleet, I'll just look for Hugins, nuke them out pretty quickly. Then I'll look for Vigils and say, hey, throw your drones on them, stuff like that. But you're kind of right in that if 3 TPs land on you anyways, who cares how small your signature was? You're going to die anyways, and you're only shooting one target at a time. Where I think this does play into it, right, is bombs are going to do more damage, which is a huge thing. Even void bombs are going to take more of your cap, right? So that can be more debilitating. But it also gives fleets like, as Suetonia's mentioned, the Baltic fleet, like so Megathrons, right? Megathrons get this crazy tracking bonus, and they deal largely kinetic damage, which is what Munins are weakest to. So if you're in with a bunch of Munins fighting a bunch of Megathrons, let's say the Munins kill off all your Hugins, all of a sudden you can just go around them with impunity anyways at a certain range, and you won't really die. But now these Munins will still be able to track you a little bit. So things will still die even without your linchpin ships being fully operational.
So there is one specific case in Burners where we were concerned about it, and that is when you're doing a Nomic-based Talos, which is the one where you have to kind of signature tank and go find the Taloses and kill them. That signature bonus is what made hacks really good and great at it. But we did some testing and they still survive. You just have to fly a little bit better.
To be clear, Hateless is pointing out like the one and only PvE consideration for the hack changes, and I think outside of that, it's nothing.
Yeah, and it doesn't change that. It doesn't change that mission. It will cause a few more pilots that are not flying it well to die, if they're kind of in between that line of flying it well and still kind of learning it and don't have it down to a science yet. That it'll cause some more deaths than what was previous. But for the most part, the mission's still runnable without the change. We've already tested it. So
I mean, as far as PvE is concerned, the only comment I have regarding this change is that I'm glad that they were able to find the surgical place that would impact their PvP usage and effectively not touch their PvE usage. And I think that's what they intended to do, and I'm happy that they did that.
It's important to note the ADC itself, the assault damage control, is also getting nerfed a little bit. It's not hugely significant, but it's not insignificant either. I don't think it's going to break anyone's ship. It's certainly not going to make anyone not use the ADC, right? That thing is so incredibly powerful that it's definitely going to get used.
As the assault damage control?
Yeah. One thing that I did see some people get excited about, though, from bomber FCs, is now that the assault damage control duration is actually shorter than the bomb duration. So, like, if you have people who are bad and they click the ADC as soon as they see bombs on overview, the effect is actually going to end before the bombs land and hit them, so they're going to die.
Well, judging by how fast people ask for logistics after they see bombs in the air, that's probably likely.
So one thing I want to kind of bring up after what you were saying, or at least, is that it sounds like it's not going to have a ginormous change to the kind of the hack meta in the no block. But one comp that kind of is pretty common, or hacks in small gang, from my experience, is that we choose them because they're generally quite tanky, and mainly because the sig radius bonus. So, we can tank capitals somewhat effectively as long as we have one or two lodges and things like that. So this is going to pretty much destroy that entire ideology of being able to tank a capital unless you're in 100 MN chip, pretty much, unless you're going to bring an insane amount of logi.
Eagle Claw asks us to compare the ADC to the Bastion module duration.
They're entirely different things.
Yeah, like those are. So the Bastion doesn't have a cooldown. ADC has a cooldown. That's why that matters.
Okay, well, I don't know what the nature of the question was, but my guess was that you turn on an ADC. Okay.
So Bastion is a tank, module that you use. We talked about them earlier. So you turn them on, but you can just keep them running. There's no, you can keep it, and when the cycle ends, you can shut it off or keep it going, and that's it. The ADC is something with a cooldown, which means you use it for only a few seconds, and then you have to wait a good long while before you can use it again.
Yeah. Okay, I thought they were comparing the Bastion damage compared to the ADC, but okay. So anything else on these hacks? And Suetonia, you mentioned something inside of staff channels along the lines of armor hacks or shield hacks are now.
Well, that was before we saw the rest of the hack changes, but this was one of the things that a lot of people were concerned about with A-hacks, what I mentioned, is when CCP buffed the web probe bubble, because in armor hacks, you're already kind of dead to rights as soon as you start losing and you start getting tackled and bubbled, because you only burn at 600, 700 MS with links, so it takes you probably a minute to get out of a saber bubble if someone just suicides the dictator into you. And with the buff to the web probe, it makes A-hacks even more dead to rights, right? You're just stuck in there for 2 minutes, and you're just going to lose even more, and you're already hard committed with A-hacks. But with the changes to making NWD hacks less strong, it doesn't seem as bad, I guess, right? Because otherwise I can speak from Volta's perspective, right? Is that we would probably just only use Munins and Cerberuses from that point on. We would just abandon the A-hack, Zealot, and Dymuses that we were using if the other nerfs didn't come in.
Amelia, did you have a question that didn't get answered? I saw a comment there.
I was just saying, to me, this change seems like it doesn't affect the large scale mutant blobs significantly from what Elise kind of responded with about the the megas and things like that. But I just wanted to kind of voice, we do a similar armor hacking as Antonio was saying, except on a significantly smaller scale, and we use MWDs instead. So we're still trying to do quite low sig to be able to tank carriers and stuff. And this change seems like it really doesn't affect the large scale kind of shield mutant kind of stuff, but it again, as kind of going back, it kind of destroys that idea of sig tanking in MWD armor hack type stuff.
Oh, yeah, if you want to do the sig tanking for that thing, it definitely have to do like an overpropped legion or something, right? Like that's I think that's probably going to be the only option, which is still an option. I remember when I was on the CSM, I really hated oversized prop mods because just everyone was using. They were like the cool thing to do at the time, and they were so annoying to try and deal with because painters didn't even do that much, and your painters would die.
Yeah, I mean, it sucked because that was the time when carriers were broken as shit, and you pretty much had to be in a 100 MN ship if you wanted to roam anywhere.
Yeah. But it is going to be definitely interesting to see how these changes play out. I do think that we're going to see a lot more battleships, right? I do think Delve specifically, and this is going to be an interesting thing because there's lots of facets to it too. I think in Delve specifically, in that Warzone, you're going to be seeing more Megathron and potentially rogue fleets as well. Which does change the meta because, hey, maybe these mutants aren't super overpowered. But one of the reasons that people use the mutants, there's a ton of reasons, right? Engagement envelope's huge, speeds and maneuverability is really huge. Kind of cheap, really, compared to the new austerity version of EVE where minerals are very expensive, especially tritanium, or how tritanium has gone up in price, right? So mutants a lot more easy to replace, which is one of the reasons that they're used. Now, if battleships become popular, and now you're going to have to really churn through minerals to pump these guys out, right? Especially if they die in droves, you suddenly have to use a few, like a super carrier's worth of minerals just to replace your battleship cache, where before you could use other stuff for it. You didn't really have to waste your mineral cache for it. So that's going to be a very interesting dynamic, especially in the war in the South.
Yeah, that's interesting. Austerity really hits the base minerals, the T1 hulls, basically, not necessarily the T2 hulls. They don't really add a lot of expense. So that if you put the emphasis back on destroying and feeding or whelping T1 ships, like you may, and especially thicker ones, you may burn more stockpiles yet.
Yeah. So, I mean, when you look into like the holistic view, right, of fleet formations coming in, bombers being less oppressive in certain aspects of it, these nerfs coming in, it definitely does feel like battleships are really going to be the right answer for a lot of these types of fights, right? Because a lot of the negatives are being removed and a lot of the positives from other things are being like dampered down a bit. So that's going to be really cool to see if the battleship meta does come back. Obviously, players have to decide to field them, right? Because the Sig Bloom doesn't matter if you're still using medium guns versus medium guns anyways. So if the players just choose to willfully ignore battleships and be like, hey guys, we're going to make this weird pact where neither of us are going to use battleships and it'll be fine, don't worry. Then obviously it doesn't matter. But if one side gets a little bit opportunistic and says, hey, my battleships can survive, and now they can do more damage to you guys.
And I think that's really interesting part. That's what's awesome is that we're actually getting changes, right? So the game isn't the same freaking thing as it's been for the last God knows how many years, and we're actually being able to theory craft around this and talk about this, and this is happening across all of these different discords and stuff, and that's just awesome for the game where we haven't had these kind of iterations.
Yeah, they're shaking things up. They're intentionally adding mastery, and I think that, listen, not everything they do is great, not everything they do is perfect, but they're certainly out there and they're listening, I think, more than they ever have before. I think that's a fair thing to say.
I think they're listening and reacting to what they're reacting hear, right? So it's not only the listening, right? CCP Rides and Signal were saying, hey, anything that you type anywhere, we will read and it'll get back to us. Even if we don't respond, it goes on our radar at some level. And you could see just how fast that specifically Team Talos does react to changes that they're making. We're talking about posts were made regarding the Marauder changes that they had talked about.
Yeah, they
within a day, they're on Singularity, right? Obviously, I don't think the 30 seconds is going to last forever. I think by the time it comes to live, it'll probably be about 45 seconds or something. But
that'd just be obscene. 30 seconds each time with double DPS. Oh
I kind of want to address. So there's a discussion in chat about play styles being eliminated, etc. And I don't want to speak directly to this specific situation, but more of a general statement that I've made in the past about this. Players that are single gameplay players are going to have their gameplay stomped on. Like, that's just going to happen.
It was always thus.
Yeah, you have to have a couple of things that you do. And maybe something is your favorite, and maybe your favorite is the thing that gets stomped on, and all you have left is your not favorite things. But there's still things to do, and you're still doing them with your buddies, or if you like to do it alone, you still get to do it alone. Like, your gameplay doesn't get taken away if you diversify just a little bit, spread out in the sandbox. And I get not everyone wants to do that, but it's going to be when you decide to double down on a single thing to do in EVE, you're accepting that may very well get washed away.
Yeah, I understand where people come from when they get really despondent when their playstyle gets nerfed, right? Because EVE, it reinforces and it kind of helps when you specialize, right? So people go into these niche roles. They say, okay, I am going to be the best guy at doing this one thing, and that's going to separate me from the pack. And then suddenly that thing doesn't exist anymore, and you're like, well, shit, I'm just ignoring me now. All this work, like my PhD and whatever I was doing before has now just been eliminated as a subject. This sucks, and I have to kick a rock down the street a little bit. But so I can see where they come from.
I'm trying very hard not to say adapt or die.
Yeah,
because that's the jerk way to say it. But
so, this is an MMO. It's a long-standing MMO. Balance changes have to happen. Like to keep the game alive, and without it just becoming stagnant, the meta has to shift. It has to move. Balance changes need to happen. That means that over time, certain playstyles will be not as good or become better. And having your fingers in more than one activity that makes you income and more than one activity that is fun for you means that you will be able to thrive in this game. If you just want to do one thing and that one thing gets nerfed, then the game is over for you. And it is literally go try something new. All right. And you might find it awesome. So
point taken. Yeah, you guys made that point really well. Let's just if there's nothing else on AHAX, forever hold your peace. Okay. Anything else? All right. We'll move on real quick to Tribute, and then we'll wrap up. Tribute has fallen. Elise, are you familiar with what the war in the North, or is anybody here familiar with it?
I'm a little bit. I kind of thought it would be like the next big thing. Or I guess the
just ended.
The next thing, yeah, but it does feel like it petered out before it really got off the ground. Yeah, I think Volta moving out of the North kind of telegraphed that, hey, they're the ones that are like, they've got their finger on the pulse of the situation, so they kind of saw the waves that were coming. They're like, hey, this isn't going to be fun for us. We're going to the other side of the map, guys. So when that happened, I was like, oh shit, this is going to slow down real fast. Well, in order seems like that's what it did.
All right, so Fraternity moves into the area. There's a lot of independent states there, and they kind of say, yeah, we're going to take this area. I've always wanted it. And if you talk to Noros, I love the way he looks over the map in such a caring way to say, like, oh, Tribute, the jewel of EVE Online. I would love to live there. And, it shakes off the criticism of that follows him around all the time about he's Fraternity, he's Winter Coalition, they have a lot of bots. Well, would that kind of an alliance and that want to situate themselves so close to a high traffic area like the Forge? Probably not. They want to live in deep space where nobody can see them. So there's a lot of interesting things going on about Fraternity moving into the space, but there are already residents there who are small and independent and don't really cluster and help each other unless they have to fight someone like Fraternity that's big. And that's exactly what happened. They did that, and they actually managed to defeat, I guess it was over an iHub. Fraternity attacked this group it's a French group called Toilet Paper. Bad name, but whatever. And they lived up in, I think it was Tribute, and they managed to bat phone enough people to really turn the battle around on Fraternity, and they won. And actually, Noros credits the initiative for really driving Fraternity off the field. So that was interesting to see initiative bombers up there doing that. I don't know how often they can do that, but they don't seem to be that busy actually in the South, frankly. We can talk about that in a minute. So the point is, Fraternity then settled, or diplomatically settled, and it looks like toilet paper has probably been bought off. Their structures will probably be sold over to Fraternity, and Fraternity is now taking over the area. They actually had an ally in Nullsecnia, and Fraternity put a keep star down for them in MTAC-O. So MTAC-O has a keep star again. I don't think we've seen one there since the glassing of Tribute. And before the glassing of Tribute was the CO2 keep star was there, wasn't it? It was the first keep star destroyed in combat. So this is the third one in MTAC-O.
Third time definitely is not going to be a charm. That thing's going to die eventually, right? Like MTAC-O is a system where it's kind of unlucky to have a keep star.
Right. And I think that's probably the record, 3 keep stars in that system now. So and I can't think of anything else that competes with that. So that's a situation in the north. It looks like it's relatively settled. We're not sure what Fraternity has in mind up there, but they do want to live there. And so we'll probably see that happen.
Yeah, it should be pointed out that them moving into that area, it wasn't just like a steamroller going over there. The group that were kind of resisting it wrote to Toilet Paper and other people like that. They called themselves the Freemen of the North, which is a really cool, it just makes you want to join them, right? Because it's got a great name.
Who doesn't want to be free?
Yeah, so they actually did the kind of run up the butcher bill on Fraternity up there, right? So they were winning pretty handily in terms of the ISK battles. It was almost like 2-1. But, the Fraternity pockets are just so much deeper, where if these guys were just going to keep going, they would bankrupt themselves in order to try and just resist the inevitable, I guess. So that's kind of the end of how that's going. It's not the end of the hostilities up there. Those guys are definitely going to still hang around in the area and fight. One of the charms, I guess, of Tribute is that you can live in Pureblind, which is NPC space that's very close to Jita in order to get supplies and stuff. And you can harass Tribute really, really well from that angle. If you want to, you can do the same from Venal, even though that's a little bit trickier given the situation there. But it's not the end of things. Those guys are still going to have a lot of fun in that area. But the scale of fighting that we were seeing before is definitely probably over. Definitely, probably.
Yeah, and Fraternity has that nice time zone, right? They can bring a lot of people at the right time, late at night for everybody else in the UK and the especially the US.
Yeah, it was working against them though, because they were losing. They were getting horribly manhandled on European time zones. Which I
think Rote Capel. They asked Rote Capel, "Hey, do you guys want to get into some kind of a treaty here?" And Rote Capel said, "Hold on a second." And they switched the timers over to U.S. time. So Fraternity was like, "Hey, we're bargaining here." They're like, "Okay, let's talk now." So yeah, it did work against them. Okay, last part of the show today. What's going on in Delve in the last week? Any idea, Elise? Because there was a bit of a. Go ahead.
There's been quite a lot of fights over iHubs and stuff like that. The area formerly known as Helm's Deep has been completely taken over. The Imperium are striking back, trying to reclaim some iHubs. They have got a lot more opportunities to do so, right? Because now they've got more space around Delve is not theirs, so they've got more targets where they can shoot. So lots of. I think it's probably toned down a little bit in this week, but still lots of constant fighting, right? You're not having these big set piece brawls and battles, but there's constant fighting spread all over Delve. At least that's what it feels like.
Yeah. There was, so I was just looking at the map the other day, and I was surprised at how much of Delve is no longer Goon Swarms.
Yeah, there are 2 constellations left.
We were talking about this the other day.
Please, can we have a structure-based sovereignty?
Yeah, that doesn't mean that this war is near an end, though. Vili has said it's going to be at least 3-4 months longer. And that probably, the majority of that is, what do you think?
Right, understatement of the century right there.
It's not all about space. It's like, where do you think all their best stuff is?
By the way, we're presupposing that Billy thinks he's going to win this war, which we don't know. Anything can happen. But it looks like 1DQ will be a long siege. But even before that, this is something that Caleb talks about, and that is you have to take out all the lily pads, all the keep stars that Imperium have to use to be able to relocate if they want to.
Yeah, and this is where the trigger warning comes in, right? Talking about things like Vietnam or Afghanistan, and if you don't control space effectively, you haven't taken anything. And again, back to, it is a sovereignty problem, right? Because doing a siege and everyone is still alive inside the castle, and then you're raising the flag saying, I won. It's like, no, you haven't. They're still in there, dude.
On the other hand, I heard the term like, wow, Legacy is not really defending their space at all. And I thought to myself, yes, they are. They're controlling all the iHubs in Delve. That's their space. Like, they moved. Like, you're hitting their old house. Their new house is your house. And they're doing a pretty good job defending it, it looks like. So I thought it was kind of funny.
And I know this is also a little bit of an anecdote thing, but when I was a teenager, we used to walk around my estate and actually kick the lampposts so they actually turned off. And it feels reminiscent of that, what's happening with TCUs and iHubs. It's like, there's no real thing or effort, and they're not really being effectively contested. And again, the losses in value over the entirety of these 8 months are still not really that high. Yes, there are enough so they've actually decoupled from the productivity, and of course you can say that the siege have actually been effective. And but as I mentioned the other day on the push to talk thing, no one is really hurting. Everyone seems to be having fun, maybe with the exception of a few groups that have kind of emptied their war chests. But again, there's plenty of assets, there's plenty of wealth. It's just no longer distributed the same way as before the war. So I don't see this war being over for at least the next 8 months. It needs to go double, right? This is why I jokingly said 1DQ will not happen until I've already been to Iceland for the next FanFest.
That's probably closer to the truth, right? We have seen a little bit of action in that 1DQ constellations. Like, some of those iHubs have been threatened. They haven't been completely taken over and completely killed or anything, but there is some threatening going on there. So the home for the Imperium is getting a little bit, that thing around them is getting a little bit closer and closer, a little bit tighter and tighter. The Anaconda is trying to constrict. But that doesn't mean that other things aren't happening, right? So we do kind of segment the war in the South, the Pavi versus Imperium war between Delve and everywhere else. That everywhere else got a little bit more bloody this week, right? I think it was the Bastion that ended up killing a Sodio belonging to Test in Esoteria. And that thing was not cheaply fit. It had quite a lot of stuff in it. It was a very juicy sort of kill. I think it ended up being almost close to 300-400 billion that was died, right? So it kind of matches the one that was taken down in Delve, I think last week. That was a really pricey Sodio. So these things, these like little hubs are starting to die. You're definitely feeling that you're definitely feeling like you're at war, right? Because shit's burning no matter where you are now, right? So Ketch is on fire, Esoteria is on fire, Quirius is on fire, Delve is on fire. There's fire everywhere, and you can't escape it now. Before, you were a little bit insulated, right? If you were part of PAPI, you were like, oh, well, Esoteria is kind of, some areas around Esoteria are on fire, but everything's largely fine. Then, Ketch started to burn. You're like, well, it's not my area of Ketch that's really on fire, right? And then your area is on fire. You're like, oh shit, everything's on fire. This is awful. And then then the reality of, oh right, I'm at war. This is what it's like. So that reality did actually have to set in. And I think at this point now, everyone definitely does feel like they're fighting, right? They're not just boys out having fun, right? They're actually trying to burn stuff to the ground.
But that's also having fun, right? To quite a lot of people that are engaged in this war, this is fun. This is really kind of the stuff that they want to do in EVE Online. It's just right now there's so many design problems with the game that doesn't really make it the game that they really want, right? The fact that already replaced and structures are really a pain to actually do anything against. The infrastructure design of how things are affected is not really good. The effectiveness of actually doing a siege that ends up mattering is not really that good when it comes to design. And again, everyone is having fun, and the people that don't like this have already figured out alternatives and are in high-sec crabbing or in wormholes crabbing and stuff like that. So we are in a kind of a stalemate. And I will say that you can actually claim that Pappy has won, but any further win criterion that they might have can't happen.
Treb says something interesting here. He says, LOL, Matterall's saying old home, while Elise is saying, wait, we are burning. And he makes an interesting point. Which is it? Where is Legacy now? Where do they live? What do they consider home?
That's a tough question, right? So
right.
I think so. The plan is that parts of Legacy are going to inhabit Quirius now. Tess has said that, Esoteria is 2000 and late, Delve is the future, right? So they've kind of drawn up what their intentions are, but they're still very much in flux, I'd say. I think if you plucked members around saying, hey, where's a lot of your assets? It'd be like, well, all my wartime assets are in Delve or Quirius, but I've got like random junk lying around that I've accumulated in Catch or in Esoteria or in Stain or in Period Basis or something like that. So they're going to have stuff that is being affected, like without a doubt, especially when you're talking about corporate infrastructure, which is essentially what these Sodios are, right? They're not quite alliance infrastructure. They're very much corporate infrastructure where groups would come together and say, hey, well, this is going to be my Sodio. This is going to be my Raitaru, stuff like that. This is where I'm going to do my industry, my building, because, that's the type of player that I am. So those things are definitely the ones that are feeling the crunch right now, because you can't just pick them up and move them. Some people have, right? So the Imperium is unanchored stuff. Pappy is definitely unanchored stuff and kind of moved it. We saw the signs a few weeks ago, I think 4 or 5 weeks ago. And even before that, where a lot of the pricey ones, we're talking about like the faction Fortizars were starting to get unanchored. That was, just part of the deal, right?
But you can't really, at least you can't really say that you're living somewhere, right? If you're not in, well, maybe not peacetime, but at least being able to fully control the area that you live in, then you're not living there, right? So just because you've put up some war tents and a bakery and whatever to support your troops doesn't mean that you have actually moved in, because you're living right next to your enemy or in the same space, right? That's a permanent war then.
I think that's the point, though, right? Because the Pappy goal is to make it so the Imperium, at least one of the goals, is to make it so the Imperium doesn't get to earn that money. And so the intention there, at least the hope, is eventually some of the people that are not like really committed to the Imperium cause will eventually start saying, this is hard, I'm leaving. This Anaconda is squeezing me a little bit too tight. I'm going to go visit the bakery in High-Sec or something. They've got really good croissants. So I'm going to go that way. So I think that's part of it, right? But if you say that you can't live in an area, you can't call somewhere home while there's people like around, then I think that Pappy gets really excited, because then they can say, hey, we made the Imperium homeless, right? Because Delve can't be their home. They only have 2 constellations.
But again, I need the Monty Python skit with the French knights on the parapet, right? Going stupid British knickets, right? They're not gone. They're on the other side. They live out of their keep stars. They are even able to actually do some resource gathering. Of course, they're not able to support themselves anywhere near what they did in the past. But you can't say that they're gone. On the contrary, they're very much in the same system. And if you start trying to behave as if you now live there, they're going to start attacking you. And again, this is all down to the fact that I feel like both sides are non-committal. And I think the initiative is on Pappy's side, right? They need to do something to, of course, they're cleaning out structures, But as we've said many times, and this is not just goon spin, this is a fact. There's so many structures right now that goons can use to make it a living hell or living fun to be in Delve, right? So I don't understand this whole strategy. Do you want to finish it, or do you want to actually just withdraw?
I like that living fun. One last thing, Suetonia, do you guys have any role to play in the war that's going on, either in the north or the south anymore?
I don't think we're involved in the north, and in the south we're kind of just a third party. We're attacking Fire Coalition in Wicked Creek for the most part, which we're assisting, I think, the Initiative and Dreadbomb down there, and we were able to get Fire to withdraw their supers and caps from Delve and move them back towards that area. So, but I mean, we're not like directly involved with anything happening in Delve.
I think the Imperium is very happy that Volta deployed where they deployed, right? I think they're just grinning from ear to ear that sort of chip landed in their lap.
Yeah, I thought it was a contract. I mean, it looked like a contract, but they, what's his name, as Fleet Commander or Space Commander? Denied
Starfleet Commander.
Starfleet Commander denied it, so...
I'm curious. Can I ask a question to Elise just about the people that are now, I won't say disgruntled, but starting to get bored on both sides, right? There's people that are kind of frustrated that they can't play the game that they used to play before this war started. Of course, it's maybe mostly people that like to crab and build their own little stockpiles of things and watch their wallet go up. But these people are a little bit annoyed at the fact that the war is this long, and they really want to get back to some sort of normalcy. Do you think these people will either go on a break or start breaking off? I'm not necessarily talking about cracks forming, because the core of the fighters are still there. But the people that don't want to participate in this, what about them? What do you think they're going to do?
So I think one of the cool parts about this is that both sides have been trying to shake that tree to wait to see that low-hanging fruit fall off, right? They've been shaking everything that they can. And the leadership on both sides have really motivated the members that, hey, you're not warriors per se. Like you may have joined for some other reasons, but they've definitely got them motivated to fight. They've got them motivated to play a role in this war, regardless. So I think a lot of those people that maybe that this wasn't their preferred play style, I think it's becoming their preferred play style. At least they've been motivated effectively to partake in it.
All right. This is the very last thing. I keep saying one more thing, but
I have a closing thought. If you want to close.
Not yet. This is pre-closing thoughts. Okay. Octahex says Brave Leak was basically the peak of this war. I don't know if he's being sarcastic, but how big do you think the Brave Leaks figure into the war, Elise?
I think it really reinforces the Imperium narrative, right? I think they can cherry pick. I don't want to say cherry pick like they're taking it out of context, but they can definitely take this and say, hey guys, what we're doing is working. Look, this is proof that it's working, because they've really framed it. The Imperium have really framed it as, hey, these guys.
That's exactly what they did.
Are loose band. Yeah. And I think one of the people I know, if you think of like who's going to be the heir apparent to the Mittani, not that he's on his way out by any means, he's still at the top of the game and going nowhere. But if you want to see like who's that next guy, who's his like in his shadow a little bit, a lot of people would say, oh, it's clearly Brisk. I don't think it's Brisk. I think it's actually Merkel-Chen. I think when Merkel-Chen talks, definitely, the members really resonate with what he says. And I wanted to bring this up last week, but I completely forgot. Also, congrats to Merkel-Chen for making a partner, Twitch partner. I think that just came 2 or 3 days ago. So another EVE player that's a Twitch partner. That's really cool. But what he says, I think, really resonates with the Imperium, right? I think they really look to what he says and they appreciate what he says, because he says it like he frames it in a very real way, and he has, a very a good hold on what his members want to hear, which is not something that's easy to do. It's very easy to screw it up, right? And sort of the coalition the weak coalition type narrative. I think that definitely comes from Merkel Chan's lips more than anyone else, and that's really what the Imperium has been running with, and it's been incredibly effective, right? So the Brave thing plays into that. Of course, they want to amplify that as much as they can. Pappy, on the other hand, they want to try and downplay it a little bit. So their goal is to say, hey, you know what? These guys, they've had a lot of pressure. We're at war. Everyone's feeling the burn, guys. But we've got them situated here. We've given them a keep star. We've given them a Sodio. They've got everything they need to thrive, and they're kicking ass over here in Quirius, right? So that's how they've spun out of it. So I think it's kind of been effective for both sides. I don't think it's the high point of the war at all, right? We do have 2 M2s to count with, and the FWSTs and the YZ9s, and
just some big stuff.
Yeah, there's a lot of shit going on that's a lot bigger. And in terms of Brave drama, this isn't even top 5. It might not even crack top 10. So,
Brave stuff.
They're dysfunctional in all the best ways. They're like your crazy cousin who's like, oh, what's so and so doing? Like, oh, they're biking to Alaska this summer. That's cool. Like, oh shit, that's wild. All right.
Yeah, like watch me drop this frozen chicken into a vat of hot oil. That's Brave. Go ahead.
I think you can. I'm going to flip sides just for a second, because I think the Brave story is almost a non-story. Of course, it has a narrative spin value, but the fact that Brave would potentially would actually need to almost tap out of an 8-month prolonged war is no surprise to anyone. Brave is good at what Brave does, but one thing that they have historically not been very good at is things like budgeting. It's almost a little bit now becoming a joke with the fact that they had expenditures going out that they had no idea what was for, right? And that they had an interim logistics head that basically just dropped into the role almost the same way that Mittani actually dropped into the leadership of Goons, right? It's no surprise that Brave said, okay, we really can't do this, at least not if no one will step up and support us financially, right? Because that's not their core activity, especially because every single time someone becomes, I would say, like upgraded or finish their education in Brave, they basically get hijacked and sniped into other groups, right? So Brave is maybe not just noobs, but they're definitely noobish, right? So they are focused on having fun and trying things in Eve and basically learning Eve.
And staying classy.
And staying classy. But even though they are of a considerable size, and they were the first to really do a proper feeder core, right? So the whole thing is the fact that Brave is struggling is not a story, and it doesn't have any real impact to the war other than, say, optics. So I'd say if anything, on the flip side, if I'm putting on my goonsplaining hat, the things that Initiative has managed to do during the war shows that is more of a challenge to Pappy than anything else. And it's I would say it's one of the reasons that the war has been prolonged. We talked about this, Elise and I, a lot last episode when we covered the whole backfields and burning the logistics line and stuff like that. But still, as I say, if I'm looking at the overarching macroeconomic metrics, I'm not seeing this really hurting anyone except maybe Brave.
All right, last comments. Fonsway, you had something?
Yeah, I'm just going to go back to one of the first things we discussed, which is if you are a person who feels that their gameplay is going to be significantly impacted by the fleet formations, then I suggest that you take to the EVE Online forums and take to social media and talk to a CSM rep if you can find them and let them know what you think. Because I think that we had a lot of people who all ended up in a similar place who felt comfortable with one particular change that could be made that would make this, that would not ruin it and not cause it to ruin something that already exists.
All right, thanks. Any of you other guys?
I'm super happy about Marauders. I can almost barely contain my excitement about it.
I'm also very happy. I know Grath is somewhere holding a parade because he went on this rant right after CCP Rise and CCP Signal were on Pando and Mirandalorian's show. he went on this, like, I don't want to say like an epic rant, but he went on like a very well-reasoned rant on open comms. And then the next day, the stuff that he was talking about is like, they're like, oh yeah, okay. That sounds good. Let's do it. let's just put it live, Grath. You're the guy that did this. Obviously, he wasn't the only one, right? Other people had talked about it too.
Actually, on TIS Discord, he actually pinged Rise, and Rise said, yeah, I meant to talk to you about that. And so they probably got into some discussion after the fact and worked it out. But yeah. So
to Funsui's point, CCP are listening, right? So they're not here to completely ruin everything. I think especially Team Talos, which is doing a lot of these types of changes, they're very keen on the fast iteration, on the quick changes or the quick reactions to these big changes. And at the same time, they're not afraid to really shake things up. They're not afraid to like just push all the sand in the sandcastle to one side and give it a good hard shake to see what happens. So it's good. Don't just be sad and glum about it. Don't be like CCP pleased about it. Try and make a well-reasoned argument for why. Like,
please be constructive more than anything else.
Essentially, use the chat that we had here as your demo, because I think that was really well-reasoned, and we came to like a really good solution.
I think we solved it
after like 15-20 minutes. We're just like, yeah, okay, this is good. Good job, everyone. Take a lap. Now let's rant about shit.
All right. At your guys' service. Thank you very much, everybody here. So I want to thank Sutonia, Hateless, Fonsui, Elise, Caleb, and of course our guest, Amelia. Thanks very much, guys, for showing up today.
Thanks for having me, guys.
Thank you, Amelia. Also want to thank McLeod for being behind the camera in the control room and also giving us a lot of good information inside of our back channel. And I want to thank you, the audience, for hanging around and giving us feedback and questions throughout the whole show. Tomorrow, during the daily news day that we have at Talking in Stations, I'll be talking with Antar Logan, who you may remember as the guy who's getting money for Intel. And so we'll talk to him about that and how that went for Brave and other groups, because I think he used to be, if I'm not mistaken, part of XIX. I think he is a Russian player, lives in the United States, but also now part of Test for the last couple of years. So we'll talk to him. Yeah, 12 billion per pings. That's actually for 3 months. So we'll get through all the mystery of that and solve it. Thank you guys very much. That's all for Talking in Stations. We'll see you next week.